Chapter 20, Aegon III. Author's note: I think it's no secret that I'm a sucker for the younger Targaryens in the dance. I'm not a Greens fan or a Blacks fan, I'm the young guys fan. I found Daemon disgusting, Otto a cockroach, Viserys an undecisive prick, Rhaenyra a spoiled bitch, Alicent a greedy one. But the younger Targaryens had better personalities and stories. So I want to make a disclaimer: this story is going to match my preferences. We're going to put increasing focus into the Baelon siblings and nephews until the first climax, where things are gonna get much more active and exciting. Check out my Patreon for 5 advanced chapters and the Discord. Patreon, patreon.com/Nivelheima. Discord, discord.gg/et2z5bwb. Underscore 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 un. A few hours before Aegon's request, there was an important matter weighing on Aegon's mind, a matter of significant import for his future, namely, his marriage. When his sister, Helaena, was born, his grandsire Otto and his mother Alicent convinced the king to betroth her to him, in recognition and imitation of both King Aegon the Conqueror and King Jaehaerys the Conciliator, to create a parallel between him and his betters. At the time, they were still under the illusion of making him king, but times change, and Baelon's position as heir and future king is unassailable, so just like their other schemes, this one backfired too, more so for Aegon than themselves. Aegon's relationship with his father was distant, causing his maternal family to have the greatest effect on his upbringing, and as the eldest progeny born from a Hightower queen, he was taught as Hightower heirs do, by maesters and septons. What this means for his betrothal is that even though he was taught King Jaehaerys' doctrine of exceptionalism, that dictated that Targaryens were unlike other men, and thus do not fall under the Seven's edict of incest as an abomination. Yet as a perceptive child, he always noticed the crunched noses and frowns directed at him whenever the mention of his marriage to his sister was mentioned, causing him to resent that implication. When he grew up and learned, he intellectually realized that it was folly. Targaryens wed brother and sisters since the days of Valyria, and they were part of the greatest empire of the ages. But even as his mind understands, his heart does not. His sister was but 2 years younger than him, and at her age she started to show the signs of a woman, but while he felt attracted to other women of her like, he could not muster even the least emotions of love toward her, not as man and woman, anyway. But the king declared their betrothal, and so they were to marry as soon as his sister reaches her majority. Aegon naturally felt both guilty and betrayed, guilty that he could not love his betrothed as his family urged him to do, and betrayed at the unfairness of the world. His father had after all given liberty to his older siblings to choose whomever they wanted. Rhaenyra's marriage with Laenor Velaryon was done only with her agreements, and there are rumors at court that the king is arranging a marriage between him and the Lady Cassandra at the prince's behest. He doesn't want to marry his sister, but he is forced to do it anyway. Any other man would confide their feelings to someone trustworthy, their close friends, and if they didn't have some, then their family. But Aegon is too mistrustful. His mother would just slap him away while his grandfather gazes from his high horse, his father is too distant, Rhaenyra too angry, and his younger siblings too young. So he was left with his brother, Baelon. Aegon stood in front of the stocky frame of Sir Roderick. The dutiful guardian stood vigil in front of Baelon's solar as always. "Sir Roderick, is my brother free?" The gentle giant nods with a smile. "It's only he and Lord Robert in, your grace. You may enter at your leisure." "Much obliged," answers Aegon while he enters the room. Baelon sat in his desk, wearing simple yet luxurious clothes, discussing something with the heavy-set man. The captains took longer to understand the new order, but they did so eventually. "I think all that is left is to resume construction as usual." The Crown Prince flips a page from a large book, reading their contents. "We should repay our debt to the Iron Bank by the end of the month. The conquest cost less than we expected," he says. "Have our men build more warehouses, and collaborate with Mysaria in leasing our new land to trustworthy businesses. We want to create as many services in the city before we lower the tariffs even more. Robert notices his entrance first. He jovially nods at him before turning toward his liege. Of course, Lord Governor. I shall go back to my duties. He gingerly bows before leaving the room. Baelon finally glances up from his business, a smile making its way to his face at the sight of his brother. Aegon. Did you come here for a game of Cyvasse? Aegon sits on a chair, shaking his head. No, I want to speak to you about something. He says. Something close to the heart. Baelon realized the seriousness of his tone and closes the large book with a slap, laying back at his chair in attention. Go on then, I'm all ears. Aegon hesitates to speak. I wish to break my engagement to Hel. Baelon's eyebrows lift up, but aside from that no other emotion was expressed. Is it someone else? He asks. Aegon shakes his head. No. He answers. No. It's just. I don't think I can be with her in such a way. I can't bring myself to imagine such a situation. Baelon hums deeply in contemplation. The silence grates at Aegon's nerves, but he knew that it was just what his brother does when he thinks. Baelon startles his brother with a clap. Sure, why not? He answers, much to Aegon's shock. But first, did you speak with Hel? Aegon was much too speechless to elaborate a response, so he just shakes his head again. Talk to her first, if she agrees, and only if she agrees. Baelon warns. You can come at dawn at Father's balcony, both he and I will be there, and we should be able to discuss it. But. Aegon says. But how? Baelon shrugs. You seem to overestimate the taboo that annulling your betrothal would bring. Usually such actions are disliked by the nobility because it implies derision from one family to another, but this is a marriage between brother and sister we're talking about. The two sides are the same, so the repercussion of such an action would be less than you'd expect. He explains. In fact, that opens up two members of the royal family up for other matches. Other lords would look favorably on seeing their chances at a royal marriage increase. Baelon stands up and mentions for Aegon to walk with him. Both stand at the door, with Baelon's hand firmly over his shoulder. You go speak with Hel, and if she agrees, I'll handle the rest. All right. Yes. Aegon stiffly answers. Baelon playfully taps his back, urging him to leave. That's my brother. Now go, there isn't much time until sundown, so you better be quick. Aegon stared dazedly at the ground, to think that an issue that plagued his mind would be resolved with such ease. When he gathered himself, he walked to his destination with a much lighter air. Underscore 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 un. Aegon found his sister at the God's Wood, poking at a line of ants, while her maidservant awkwardly stood behind her. Your Grace! You'll be late to your lessons, she urged. But Helena was ever so eccentric, ignoring her words completely. Aegon sported a polite smile, gingerly holding the servant by the shoulders. It's all right, he softly says. The maid slightly startles, dumbfoundedly staring at his face. Your Grace! You inform the Septa that she'll miss her lessons today. I wish to speak with my sister. The servant obediently bows, heeding his words, while Aegon turns to his sister. She was still mindlessly staring at the ants, hunched with her chin resting on her knees. Before Aegon could speak, she interrupts. Do you see those ants? She says. They march in order, fulfilling their tasks, gathering food and resources for their people. She continues. They do it because it is their duty, known to them from the moment they were born. Helena turns to her brother, her gaze seemed so mysterious to his eyes. Not unlike you and I, is it? Helena. Aegon softly let out. But unlike I who just followed the wind, you rebelled through any way you could. She says. I thought you'd finally resigned yourself to your fate, but that is not quite true, is it? Before he could answer, she continues. I know why you're here. I do not mean you any dishonor. Aegon tries to deny any negative implication. You misunderstand. She says, shaking her head. I dreamt of it, the culmination of Baelon's actions, his existence straying my fate from the dark future it would lead me to. Thank you, Egg. His sister swiftly stands up and envelopes him in a hug. Thank you for doing this, she says, before running toward her maidservant's trail, doubtlessly headed for her lessons. That was such a strange conversation. Aegon softly mused to himself. But I can take this as acceptance, right? Underscore 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 un. And then we come back to the present, Baelon hiding his smirk behind his cup while their father almost dropped his in shock. What did you say? Aegon takes another second to stare at Baelon, who gives him an affirming nod. He takes a deep, calming breath. I wish to annul my engagement to Helaena. He repeats. Viserys makes to stand why I ought to. But gets interrupted by Baelon's hand. The king dumbfoundedly stares at his heir, questioning him with his eyes. Baelon smiles calmly. Let's hear him out, that's the least we could do. Viserys stares back and forth between Aegon and Baelon, before sighing and sitting back on his chair. Speak, Aegon, so we can end this farce. He says. Aegon gulps, feeling cold sweat creeps on his back, before speaking his mind. I'm not claiming I should have a say in who I should marry. When I heard rumors of Bael's betrothals I started thinking about mine, and I realized it's not so much the prospect of marriage that discomforts me, rather it is the prospect of marrying Helaena. And what is wrong with her? Viserys sparks out. You think she's unworthy of your hand? She is my sister. He shouts back. I love her, as family do, but not as a woman, never as a woman. Viserys face palms, letting out another sigh. You are Targaryen, we do not care about such things. He says. But I deserve to be happy. Why do I have to marry someone I don't desire, while you allow Rhaenyra and Baelon to do so? Aegon's face reddens from anger, letting out words that he hid deep within his heart. Am I not your son? Do I, Helaena, Aemond, and Doran not share your blood? I am not asking to marry whoever I want, I just wish it to not be mine own sister. Aegon says. It is the only thing I ever ask of you. Viserys looks taken aback by his son's singular belligerence. His children of Alicent were always demure in front of his authority, never directly asking for anything. Aegon in particular may have been a drunkard and a disappointment, yet it is the first time he directly asked something from his father, let alone raises his voice at him. The emotion on his son's face tugged at his emotional strings, so Viserys sought to gently let him down. Look, son. He says. Annulling the engagement would shame your sister, the dishonor would chase away all suitors to her hand. That is untrue, father. Interjects Baelon. Everyone knows Helaena to be chaste, the one to be dishonored would technically be Aegon, considering his history as wastrel. The king glares at his other son. You did this. He claims. Baelon just shrugs. This was all Aegon's doing, but I don't think it's such a big deal. Aegon wisely keeps his mouth shut, letting his brother carry the conversation. Viserys grit his teeth. You would have me annul the engagement of my own children? What reason would I give the people? What sort of image would it present to the court? Baelon just laughs. They'd be too busy trying to secure their hands. He says. Who would even care? The only people concerned are Aegon, Helaena, you and their mother. There is no need to explain the reason, just let people make up their own minds. That would work for Aegon, but Helaena is a woman, whoever she marries would receive a dragon, which is a dangerous precedent. The Velaryons are a thing, father, that precedent was already created by your grandsire. The only thing House Targaryen could do now is use it as leverage to secure our legitimacy. Baelon rebukes. Lords are willing to pay a fortune to secure a marriage with Aegon. How much do you think they'd pay for Helena's? A female Targaryen's hand is going to be the most coveted. He shrugs. Worst case scenario, we either match her up with Lucerys or some second son who will take the name Targaryen, keeping dragons firmly under our banner. Plus, Aegon is right, don't you think your children deserve a chance in happiness? Will you truly live with yourself, knowing that you left your son and daughter in an unhappy marriage? Do you not wish for them the joy that you experienced, the one that brought us into the world? Viserys' face falls into deep thought. His son's arguments were poised to strike at his weak points, assuring the peace of the realm, and securing his family's happiness. Those are the two things that defined Viserys Targaryen's life. After what felt like ages to Aegon, the king finally comes to a decision. And is Helaena agreeable to this arrangement? At Aegon's frantic nod, he looks to Baelon. Alicent will need to be convinced, she's the one who pushed for the betrothal in the first place. Baelon shrugs him off. Just speak with Otto, he'll agree, and even convince his daughter to go with it. He says. You're the hardest one to persuade, father. Indeed, since Otto and Alicent's scheme to liken Aegon to his namesake failed, the hand would favor an annulment since it would give him a chance to secure favorable matches for the brother and sister. They are half Hightower after all. To that calculating man, it would be more useful to use their hands as bargaining chips instead of just marrying them to each other. And Alicent is nothing but obedient to her own father, ever more so since her metaphorical lever, Larys Strong, was ousted from Westeros. Aegon couldn't sleep that night, all too happy about the prospects of a freer life. Chapter 21, Cosimo Rogaray I. Author's note, it seems that I owe you 2 more chapters. I am incredibly sorry for that, which is why over the next 2 weeks I'm dropping at least 6 chapters. You're going to see a lot more of the SSE people since they're going to get more and more relevant to the story. Check out my Patreon for 5 chapters in advance, and make sure to join the Discord. The muse seems to hit me frequently, so I'll attempt to write some long-ass one-shots/omax for the free members of Patreon. Oh, and since Gur Martin took real-life inspiration for Lysandro Rogaray from Lorenzo de' Medici, I did the same for the OC Rogas in the story, so I think that's neat. Patreon, patreon.com/Nivelheima. Discord, discord.gg/et2z5bwb. Underscore 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 un. The aging head of the Rogaray Bank and Magister of the Kingdom of the Three Daughters stared at the bickering magisters with thinly veiled disdain. For a Lysani, the old man's face was particularly plain, and was it not for his lilac eyes then one would mistake him for a Bravasi. He had a long face, a prominent nose, and thin lips. His demeanor was serious and he wore simple clothing for a man of his stature. As a boy, he lacked the famed beauty of the Lysani, causing him to turn to the mercantile side of their society in order to improve his station. It was after years that he was able to establish his bank as an almost equal to the Iron Bank. His alliances and intermarriages with Tyroshi and Myrish houses were also invaluable in the establishment of the Triarchy, and he used that influence to secure his family even more power and riches. Look at them, quarreling like children in a playground. The Lysani dialect was melodious and musical, but paired with his rough voice it seemed lackluster. To think those are some of the most powerful men of Essos. Can you blame them? Interrupted a suave voice from his side. They lost much gold to that Targaryen prince. If I was in their position I'd do the same. His grandson was wise, if not too kind. Cosimo was blessed with many children. His oldest Piero Rogaray was sickly from gout at a young age. and it is Cosimo's greatest regret to watch his son and heir die before his departure. Now Piero's son, Lysandro, is to be groomed as his successor. Maybe it was the gods' mercy that he turned out to be as clever as his sire. The Rogas, like any other house of the Triarchy, lost significant investments at the onset of Prince Baelon's conquest, but unlike the others, their trade was in debts and currency. Cunning as ever, Cosimo secured their influence over the three sisters by lending unfavorable loans to the houses who suffered the most. Some of them already defaulted in their debts, ceding their assets to them. And by the time the Targaryens sent envoys to each of the sisters, the Rogas had already recouped their losses and more. We mustn't allow those barbarians to keep their claws on the stepstones. With the tolls, and the loss of our investments in Dorne, we won't be able to conduct any trade with the western continent. That was Jacario Lohar, another Lysani magister for the Triarchy and the primary competitor to Rogare's supremacy within the Lys, although his influence is waning as of late. His influence stems from the navy. He was but a subordinate to his brother Sheriko Lohar, the most powerful admiral of the Triarchy after Kragasdrahar's death. As you can see, he is the loudest supporter of the war at the Stepstones. Cosimo slammed his cane to the ground, gathering the attention of the magisters. How do you propose we do that, Jacario? Did you forget that each of our august cities received envoys at the behest of King Viserys Targaryen, urging us to stop the conflict, and inviting us to the negotiating table? His voice echoes. This is not Daemon Targaryen or that damned sea snake, but the king. What if you provoke them into an invasion? Who will defend us if their soldiers march on our cities? Can we expect your sword when you are faced with not one, but more than a dozen dragons? His speech gained voices of agreement from the majority of the magisters. The elongated war of the Stepstones and the loss of the Dornish market was a waking call to most of them. They all lost the arrogance gained from their previous victories. There is always a bigger fish in the sea, and they have just realized that. You speak of our inability, implying that we just lay our blades and surrender to those curs. Jacario was undeterred, however. If we negotiate with the Sunset Kingdoms, we'll admit our inferiority to those savages. And before you know it, the other cities would smell blood in the water. We need to make a stand. And if we are to negotiate, we need to do so from a position of strength. The council chamber devolved into a cacophony of shouts and insults, as people argued between adhering to the Targaryens' demands for negotiation, or just to continue the naval war. But the sisters spent too much and had gotten nothing for the last several years. For the cautious magisters, the prospect of cutting their losses and ending the war seemed more favorable, and so at the end, they chose to send 3 envoys in order to negotiate with the Westerosi, one for each sister. Underscore 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 un. The High Council session was held in Tyrosh. Afterwards, Cosimo and his family and advisors retreated to an opulent manor on the outskirts of the city. The luxurious estate was situated on the shores of the island, providing him with a serene view of the blue sea on the horizon and the delightful scent of the ocean in the air, allowing him to unwind. Lysandro did the same at his right, pleasantly munching on some fruits. What are we to do about Westeros? Our plan to ingratiate ourselves with both the Targaryens and the Martells is unfeasible, and their trade is more likely to flow through Brava Sea channels, causing us to lose a significant portion of our revenue. He says. Should we try to secure a royal marriage? We share the same Valyrian ancestry as the Targaryens. I'm sure they would be amenable to such a union. Cosimo scoffs. Don't be daft, the Targaryens are too secure in their position to entertain a marriage with us. We are slavers, which would leave a stain to their reputation in the eyes of the Westerosi lords. He says. No. We cease most of our major investments in Westeros. Any deals or contracts concerning the Sunset Kingdoms are from now on secondary. So what are we to do then? Give up on our most profitable market? Lysandro asks. A beautiful woman, with platinum hair and ocean eyes, gingerly approaches the duo. "Masters, Magister Nicar Audiobook is here to see you." While Cosimo keeps staring at the horizon, Lysandro looks at him in question. Cosimo nods in assent, upon which Lysandro turns to the bed slave. "Let him in." He turns back to his grandsire. "If Nicar is here, that means the Iroquois wants something," he says. "The Tyrosh 11 are but mouthpieces to their Archon, after all. The Triarchy, or its official name, the Kingdom of the Three Daughters, was an eternal alliance governed by a high council of 33 magisters, 11 from each city. Theoretically, the council is to be collectively responsible for all 3 cities and their subordinate territories, superseding the local authorities of each city's government. However, unlike the Lys and mere representatives, all the Tyrosh 13 are puppets to their Archon, Iroquois Modares. Tyrosh took the blunt of the losses in the war for the Stepstones. Iroquois is starting to lose the support of their major houses, some of it mitigated by blaming Cragasdraher's leadership." Lysandro commented. "It puts him in a precarious position. He did rise in his position through his military exploits, after all. Iroquois Modares was the man credited with the strategy that birthed the Triarchy. The battle of the borderland that pit the 3 sisters against the armies of Volantis was his brainchild, as he sent envoys, using concessions to lessen the tensions between them and taking advantage of their greed and fear in order to unite them against a common enemy. He bribed enemy sellswords to betray Volantis, and used their combined fleet to cut off their supplies. Using the fame from its success, he rose as the sole authority of Tyrosh, refusing a magister position in the newly formed High Council, favoring control over his home city. Even the appointment of Cragasdraher was done under his advisement, but the crab feeder and his Myrish backers betrayed him, raising the tolls on the Stepstones to an unrealistic degree despite his complaints and causing the war against Corlys and Daemon. Nicar Audiobook is his right-hand man, and the one responsible for relaying his wishes to the magisters of the High Council. He was a chubby fella, dressed in colorful silk robes and gold accessories. Every one of his steps jingled like a pouch of gold. His hair was dyed in bright blue whilst his long beard in vermilion. The man had thin eyes and a permanent smile on his face. "Magister Rogare. It is always such a pleasure." His voice was gentle and jovial, but somewhat boisterous, giving it a disarming feel. "I come with gifts," he mentioned to the gaggle of slaves following behind him, dragging with them chests filled with silver, silk, and jewelries. Alongside the material wealth were beautiful beauties, wearing skimpy outfits and demurely bowing to the bankers. Lysandro stared again at Cosimo, noting his disinterest. He mentioned for the servants to take the gifts away. "We thank you for your generosity, Magister Nicar. It is truly kind. Nothing but the best for such an august guest, and an apology for our belated welcome to our humble city." Nicar turns to the elder Rogare. "I heard your speech at the council session, Magister Cosimo. You are a fine orator. Let it be known that we completely agree with your views." Cosimo lets his scoff be heard. "Of course Tyrosh will adamantly support the cessation of war in the Stepstones, considering the fact that their proximity to the archipelago caused them to receive the most damage. Archon Modares should have forced his issue when King Viserys' first envoy came to demand lower tolls along the islands. Now even if he was proven right, rumors of his weakness and inability to enforce his authority are abundant within higher circles," he said. "Now the militants are gathering around Sheriko Lohar, causing me naught but headaches." All things considered, Cosimo is somewhat grateful for the recent happenings. The aftermath of the Stepstones was causing instability to ferment within the Triarchy. Sheriko had begun fanning the flames, pushing for an increase of hostility, while banking houses like the Rogas argued for more peaceful resolutions. Their stranglehold on the Dornish markets was still strong at the time, so while the Stepstones caused many to lose out, most people thought that gold would keep flowing and that with their position they would be able to get another try at securing the barren islands. The other free cities' actions at the time were clear. They drove a wedge between the sisters using bribes and alliances with specific forces, the Myrish lost most of their political capital since the whole war was blamed on their greed, making Lys and Tyrosh the deciders in their strategy for the coming days. Tyrosh held the moral high ground. They can claim that they had predicted the results of this debacle before it happened, but they suffered too much financially, making Lys the one who pulled ahead. Yet Lys also had their own problems. Even though out of the three sisters they came out largely unscathed, the political landscape within the city was tense as the noble houses were separated between two camps, the pragmatist Rogas and the warmongering Luhars. The conquest of Dorne put an end to the tensions, as all factions realized the need for unity in face of such a large loss, evading the splintering of the Kingdom of Three Daughters for a later date. Audara's smile turns brittle. That may be so, but you must realize the need for cohesion in these trying times. You may be at your strongest now, but as time goes on the Iron Bank is bound to push you out of business, using their friendship with the Westerosi Crown Prince to gobble up a significant share of the market. His smirk turns haughty at the prospect of their downfall. You're going to need allies if to survive the days to come. Lysandro clicks his tongue in annoyance. Your Archon is in no better shape, the bear's getting too old to hunt, and the hounds are circling, waiting for the slightest weakness. He stares down the Magister. In fact, didn't Magister Jaco spend the previous fortnight at Luhar's estate? Jaco was another of the Tyroshi 11, an old subordinate of the Archon of Tyrosh. News of his betrayal and his shift of allegiance toward the House of Luhar were abound. That, I'd argue, is a boon for my case. Audaraes says. The Archon believes that both he and your honorable house may have common cause. Luhar's encroaching hands are extended way too far, and it is only a matter of time before he makes a mistake. He notes. He says that in the meanwhile the Triarchy has to remake its strategy. We are to learn from our mistakes, and endeavor to emulate our betters. Oh! The old man's eyes light up in interest. What a coincidence! Both I and the Archon seem to share the same mindset. Tell me, Magister, what does Eriquo have in mind? For the first time, Audaraes shows his teeth alongside a predatory smirk. To quote our venerable leader, we are to replicate the Targaryen whelp. He proved to us that a foe thought to be unassailable can be defeated using new methods. Instead of looking west, we should head east. The disputed land's resources can finally be exploited. Now that they are pacified, the golden fields terrorized by the Dagger Lake pirates gatekeep riches of gold and amber flowing from the axe and pine cones from the forest of Qohor. Ruined cities of the ancient Roynar are disallowed to flourish due to the constant threat of the Dothraki hordes. A menacing smile grows in Cosimo's face to match. He obviously likes what he hears. If we three daughters of Valyria were to pacify all the lands west of the Royne, we would know riches untold. It didn't take a second for the aged man to reply. Tell your Archon, that we Rogas do not lack currency to fund this war, and that if he dares to match his ambitions with actions, we would stand fully behind his back. He says. Tell him, that the Rogaray Bank is willing to gamble it all in order to usher in a new age of prosperity. The question is, does he have the balls to match our bid? Chapter 22, Corlys Velaryon I. Author's note, truly and incredibly sorry for the recent lack of chapters. Not only do I have to deal with exam season, but I was simply bogged down with a shit ton of extracurricular projects. When I get free I'll drown you with chapters, but until then please simply wait. It was very hard writing Corlys, so I hope I made him justice. Check out my Patreon and the Discord for 5 chapters in advance, and 4 chapters of a nascent DxD fanfic. Patreon, patreon.com/Nivelhema. Discord, discord.gg/et2z5bwb. Underscore 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 un. How goes our merchant fleet? The rhythmic ebb and flow of the sea was a calming, familiar sound to Corlys' ears. He has spent more time in wooden ships than stable land, so much so that he felt at home here. In the expanse of the unending sea, the sea's nape was the most comfortable. Vaemond answers from his right. We received news of their arrival at Starfall. They lost some 2 ships in a skirmish with privateers disguised as pirates, but their numbers allowed them to repel the enemy. He says. The captains should have already started negotiations with Dane's representatives. They say they may not be able to procure exclusive contracts, but the Dornish seem open to trade, almost too much so. Jacaerys worked in proximity to him, cleaning the deck. As his squire, instead of cleaning his armor and taking care of his horse, Corlys thought it better to have him get familiar with ships. He worked as a deckhand too in his youth, and those experiences, grueling as they were, turned out to be invaluable in his tenure as a captain. The boy, praise his soul, didn't say a single complaint and worked diligently in the Sea Snake. The other sailors made up many japes at his expense, but he could see the gleam of respect in their eyes. It was about time. As his heir, it is only natural for the boy to get groomed for the position. Good. He answers his brother. Tell them not to bargain too much. We want to secure as many contracts as we can before Otto manages to sway their lords. By the time the procession returns to their castles, I want them to be so enamored by our gold that they discard whatever promises they made. It was a shame that Corlys couldn't stay too long in King's Landing. His fleet, merchant or otherwise, needed close supervision in order to function optimally, and in such a critical period, optimal was the minimum. Corlys was a smart man. He can certainly feel when the winds shift, and the conquest of Dorne could change everything for their house's prospects, overshadowing the Stepstone's importance. Holding on to those islands allowed for great short-term benefits, and as long as they were the sole focus of his house, they were worth the hassle. But Dorne's inclusion could mean greater long-term advantages. Alliances established at its onset could endure generations, securing his house's prosperity for more than decades, maybe centuries. In revenge, the Stepstones were always in flux, and he never expected to hold on to them for long anyway. Jace. Yes, Captain. You're dismissed for the day. You did an adequate job. Tomorrow, you will start shadowing me. The boy's tired face lights up in elation. Yes, Captain. Corlys notices his brother's disdain at the prospect. What? So he forces the issue. You know what? He answered. That boy has not a single speck of your blood. It took him weeks to catch his sea legs, his puke coloring the sea all along. How could a Valyrian be so uncomfortable in a ship? His bravado dies as he comes across Corlys' stern gaze. He was loved by my son as his. He carries the Valyrian surname, my name. He lectures. He is the son of a princess, and betrothed to my granddaughter, and most importantly, he rides a fucking dragon. He says. So for all intents and purposes, he is my grandson, and his sons will be Valyrians, not unlike you or I. So you will treat him as such, or else it is not me you will have to answer to, but the king. Understood. Vaemond's face scrunches in momentary anger, not answering out of defiance. I said. I understood. His voice echoed in the ship, but his men were too experienced to get startled. I will respect your wishes, brother. He says. But know this, it is only my duty to you that pushes me so. I hold no respect for the boy, and I never will. As long as you keep your mouth shut, I have no need for your respect. He is our house's legacy, my legacy, and I'll be damned before I see you endanger that. Corlys answers. Now go on, tell the maester to relay my message, and prepare for onboarding. I could see the city on the horizon. His brother turned around without another word, causing the sea snake to sigh in frustration. My family will be the end of me. He complains. Underscore 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 un. Am I late? Corlys asks the occupants of the room. The Triarchy's envoys were already received at court, but the weather didn't allow for Corlys to be present for it. However, the negotiations won't start without his presence. it was his gold, ships and men that participated in the War of the Stepstones, and his influence and fame were held in high regards by SSC houses, so the small council thought it prudent to include him in, his experience at war and during his travels thought to be invaluable. Not at all, Lord Corlys, please take a seat. The king spoke. The latter was much healthier than the last time Corlys saw him, and he bowed and greeted him before sitting at the other end of the small council table. The last time he sat in this room it was a completely different situation. Lord Strong has been alive for one, and the Lord Hand held almost absolute authority, only second to the king. While his coffers were hemorrhaging due to the crab feeders' tolls. Now while Otto was not defanged, his claws were certainly duller, and the prince who sat at the king's left was the man of the hour. The other members were largely different, with the exception of Grand Maester Melos and Lyman Beesbury. Tywin Lannister was the new master of ships, while Jasper Wilde replaced the late Lionel Strong as master of laws. Both seemed happy with their situation. The new betrothal of the prince to Lady Cassandra Baratheon was in some ways credited to the Stormlander, giving him much favour from his fellow lords. While the prince's canal brought much trade to the Lannister lands, and he lately heard rumours of a three-way deal between the Lannisters, the Tullis, and the prince concerning the Riverlands that sought to bring them even more benefits. Prince Daemon was also invited, considering his past, even if he probably didn't have much to say, and he sat next to Corlys sulking in his own way, seemingly bored out of his mind. Who did they send, by the way? Corlys asked. Drazen Corrogare from Lys, Rakalio Rindun from Tyrosh, and Serena Ormes from Myr. Grand Maester Melos names. Corlys scratches his beard in thought. I believe the Triarchy's position is clear. I concur. Otto agrees with Corlys, for once in his life. Baelon shrugs. They didn't try to hide it. He says. My Bravici connections are saying that the Rogas and Tyrosh's Archon are currently in a controlling alliance, and that they are adamantly pushing the High Council into securing a truce with us. Lannister's smirk was downright smug. That also means that we can dictate the terms of the negotiation. And that was the point of contention. Each member of the council will wish for different terms from the Triarchy, every one of them is serving their own interest after all. Speaking of terms, what should our goal be? The king finally asks. The Maester of Laws promptly answers. I think we can all agree that we must demand the cessation of all Triarchy-backed raids in the Narrow Sea. Many Westerosi ships are getting besieged by the large amount of pirates and privateers sponsored by Triarchy gold, and they must put a stop to that. Everyone else nods in assent. But Corlys frowns. That may not be as easy as we think it'll be. He says. Their envoys will agree easily enough, but the Triarchy have their own factions, and the raids are primarily financed by their militant factions, which seem to have lost influence in favor for the pragmatists. Some dragon fire may work better than words. Daemon finally speaks. The militants may fund the raids even if we assure concessions from the whores, but they cannot publicly claim responsibility. Send me with a couple of ships, and I'll burn them all to the ground. That may actually work, since they cannot claim responsibility that makes the pirates free for our retaliation, as long as we establish a reputation against piracy that should be able to scare the rest away. Tywin agrees. If that is our chosen strategy, then we must come to an accord with the envoys in advance. We should collaborate with the pragmatists in order to disallow the militants from inciting another war to break out. Otto says. Any collaboration would give them leverage to get more favorable conditions concerning tolls and tariffs alongside the Stepstones. I think we just deal with the pirates and be done with it. Corlys interjects. To be honest, Corlys doesn't give a fuck about the pirates. His fleet is large enough not to worry about them. Whatever the other lords' losses are, they are surely much lesser than his. His singular goal amidst these negotiations now that the Stepstones are out of his hands is to get the lowest rates for his ships. Speaking about tolls. The prince interjects. I'd like to propose what many of you may consider a radical idea. Once everyone's attention was focused on him, he continued. I say we abolish all tolls and tariffs for the ships traversing the stepstones. He took advantage of their shocked silence in order to elaborate. There are several aspects that may shift Westerosi trade from one focused in imports to a more self-sufficient one capable of exporting goods instead. He says. The North is in the process of gathering a surplus of timber, cattle, iron, fur, and are already in the process of exporting ice to the hotter regions of Westeros and Essos. The Dornish were already major exporters, and with their integration they should be able to fill up their deficiencies from Westerosi channels at a much cheaper price. The increase in trade allowed many men to exchange goods in Lannisport in exchange for gold, while the Riverlands aren't and still won't cater to Eastern merchants. The Stormlands have a new navy getting built at this very moment, which will allow them to also trade in timber, wool, and grain. Also, with new farming and smelting processes, newly discovered dyes and an increase in production capacity, the Crownland are capable of exporting a great deal of new specialized goods to not only Westerosi markets, but Essosi ones too. And finally, the increase of self-sufficiency of the other kingdoms means that the Reacher lords might find themselves with a significant surplus in foodstuffs, even with Dorne's demand for it. The Ironborn were left out because everyone knows that they don't do trade. At this point any ships that cross the narrow sea will leave with more goods than what they'd be bringing, so it'll be much more advantageous for us to abolish all tolls and tariffs. Additionally, we could focus even more concessions, like the disallowing of all and any merchants dealing in flesh to cross the narrow sea. It took a moment for the rest to register his words, but Lyman was surprisingly the first to interject. I believe His Grace may have a point. Over the last couple of years we saw an increase in taxes from the other kingdoms. In fact, I believe that Your Grace, the King, has also received more petitions from lords in order to lower tariffs. Beesbury says. All proceeds gained from the tolls would go to the treasury anyway, so only the royal family would take a loss. Corlys could work with this. Taxes from increased trade will compensate the loss, and if not there is always the option of renegotiation. A shrewd light made its way to Lannister's face. Increased trade is always a boon. I'm sure your subjects would be excited at the prospect, Your Grace. Otto and the rest just stayed silent. The king considered the offer for a while, before coming to a decision. I think this strategy is feasible, let's use it. Now that the large picture was decided, the rest of the preparations were particularly boring. Underscore 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 un. Corlys and Otto stood side to side at the door of the small council chamber. The last members had already left, leaving only the last two rivals left. You seem to be accumulating losses as of late. Corlys began. The gods test us in many ways. Otto answers. Corlys eyes his old adversary. The hand of the king is skilled at hiding his emotions, yet the sea snake was familiar enough with him that he was able to glimpse at his inner thoughts. Otto was somehow strangely unbothered by the coming situation. A treaty signed between the crown and the Triarchy would allow the mercantile blacks to gather more riches, and therefore, even more influence for their competition against the traditionalists. You seem to lack vision, Corlys. Otto says. As long as the prince is in power, neither of us is going to triumph over the other. I thought you'd be able to realize that. With that mysterious comment, the hand left Corlys to stew. Corlys was thinking on his words for hours, until he received a list of the men who would be present for the negotiations. He noted the absence of the hands, but it was overshadowed by the presence of another's. At the bottom of the piece of parchment, the name Aegon Targaryen was written. The Valyrian lets out a loud laugh. Fucking Baelon! He says. Fucking Baelon! Chapter 23, Drazen Korogare. Author's note, again, incredibly sorry for the slow updates. I'm still facing the same issues, but I made sure to release a chapter this week. Check out my Patreon for 5 advanced chapters, and I hope you have a wonderful time. Patreon, patreon.com/Nivelhema. Discord, discord.gg/et2z5bwb. Underscore 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 un. Drazenko Rogaray was the second son of Piero Rogaray, so whilst his older brother Lysandro was trained in financial matters in order to inherit the family business, Drazenko's education was focused more on politics and diplomacy, to be the channel by which the grasping hand of the Rogas could find new horizons, the link that will create new opportunities to grow his family's interest. Over the previous years he prepared himself to move to Sunspare as a permanent envoy and liaison between the Martells and the Triarchy, hoping to gather more support and influence for the Bank of Rogaray. But then the Targaryen crown prince had the mad idea to invade the desert princedom, and succeeded to boot. So at the inception of a new crisis, he is in an even more compromising yet important position, as one of 3 envoys responsible for negotiating with the Targaryens over the delicate issue of the stepstones. It was but a fortnight after the new year of 122 AC that he arrived in the city. Its reputation was very much undeserved, it didn't smell like shit for one, and secondly it seemed to him as organized as any of the free cities, a bit bland, but that is to be expected from inferior architecture. He learned much later that this was due to the major reforms implemented by Prince Baelon, the same prince who caused the debacle he found himself in, so Drazenko found himself looking forward to meeting the man. He met the king though, but that was an unexciting event. The man was clearly sickly and weak, yet the throne he was sitting on was more than intimidating enough. He heard that the other 2 envoys had already arrived. Rakalo Rindun arrived much earlier than either of the rest, and had apparently already ingratiated himself with the young lords of the realm. He could see that the Tyroji admiral was boisterous and shared many qualities with Westerosi, their dislike for slavery, for example. And it is rumoured that he spent many days training alongside them in the keep's yard. An aged but tidy-looking man approached him in the hall. "Lord Drazenko." The hand of the king greeted his tone haughty and blunt. Drazenko smiled. "I am no lord, my lord hand, just Drazenko is fine." Otto simply nodded. "I hope your stay here was pleasant." "It was," he answered. "This castle is magnificent, truly worthy to house the rulers of a continent." Personally, Drazenko thought it was subpar, but flattery is a basic proponent of diplomacy. "Good," Otto says. "I have come to you to apologize for my absence in today's meeting. The king deemed me worthy for another task, so I'm afraid we won't be able to discuss matters." "Something more important than the negotiation?" "That's strange. Could it be that the king simply didn't wish for the man to involve himself in it? There are rumors aplenty about the hand's tendency to favor his house in decisions pertaining the realm whenever he could get the chance, so that may be it." "I also came to ask you for a favor." The hand asks. "A favor, from the hand of the king?" The Rogaray asks himself. "Just ask and it shall be yours." "Gratitude to you, I do not usually ask for favors from any man. But your house has a reputation that pushes me to do so despite my natural disinclination," he says. "In truth, my grandson, Prince Aegon Targaryen is going to be present at the negotiation meeting tomorrow. The king had him apprentice under the Master of Laws and he showed incredible promise, but I am afraid that negotiations at such an advanced level may be too much for him to handle. Neither the prince nor the king has the tendency to favor family over skill, so I found their decision to be unusual." His mouth quirked up at the last part. "Yet as a loyal servant, I follow their wishes to my best abilities, but as a grandfather, I cannot help but worry, so if it isn't too much, could you show some leniency toward him? Make him look good in front of his sire." He stills for a moment, thinking his words through. "I shall strive to do so. In fact, I'm about to visit my colleague, so I may be able to tell them to do the same," he managed to say. Otto smiled lightly. "That does put my mind at ease," he says. Farewell, Lord Drazenko, may we meet again. Farewell, Lord Hand. Underscore 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 un. The doors to Serena Orme's room opened abruptly, allowing him to swiftly enter. The woman was a magister's wife, and a very influential person in the city of Mir. She was middle-aged, with olive skin and onyx hair and eyes. Rakalio Rinduan, Tyrosha's representative, was a famed admiral, a devious and eccentric man. He stood at 6.5 feet tall, with a stooped posture and gait since one shoulder was higher than the other. He dyed his hair and beard purple with orange streaks, and always sported a malicious grin. "What do we know about one Aegon Targaryen?" he suddenly asks. Serena looks at him with a raised eyebrow. "Not much. He's the second son, with Hightower blood through his mother." "Why do you ask?" "Because Otto Hightower just approached me, implying his importance to the coming negotiations." He turns to the man. "You spent more time here than both of us, do you know something we don't?" "Yes, actually." The Captain General's accent was indistinguishable, you couldn't know his origins through it alone. "He's apprenticed to the Master of Laws, and participated in the negotiations for Dorne's reparations. I also heard rumors lately that his betrothal with his sister Princess Helena is to be annulled." The Rogare puts on a thinking pose. "The Hand told me that he'll participate in today's meeting too, but that wasn't all, there was something there I couldn't quite grasp. Do we know what their demands are? Without an idea of their strategy we won't be able to divine any hidden causes behind the younger prince's appointment, if they do exist, that is." Serena says. "What can we expect from the negotiations? They'll try to secure at least nominal ownership over the islands. Westerosi care too much about appearances. There is also the matter of the raids on their ships. They'll demand an immediate halt to their support, if only to secure more leverage." She continues. Drazenko scratches his chin in thought. "Otto indicated his absence in the meeting, while we know for sure that the Sea Snake will be present." "That is good news, right?" Serena says. "Corlys Velaryon will ask for the lowest tolls possible. Spicetown is a major merchant destination, the more ships cross the stepstones the faster he fills up his coffers. Corlys isn't the one in control of the Westerosi side, the Crown Prince does." Rakalio comments. "I didn't meet the man, but rumors are abound about his administrative and mercantile acumen. Dragonstone has seen many ships dock at their ports. Dragonstone has been the source of plenty new exotic goods, like dyes, diamonds, obsidian, and brandy. And with the help of Bravasi shipbuilders has a significant merchant fleet." Serena says. "Alongside his new King's Landing reforms, I believe he'll be of an equal mind with the Sea Snake. Maybe that is even the reason for the Hand's absence." "Maybe," Rogare said. "Yet we cannot know for sure, let us prepare for all possibilities. Now, for trade deals, do we propose we negotiate as a united entity or as individual cities?" "I say we stay united, we'll get better." What few hours they had before the meeting were spent collectively brainstorming strategies and scenarios. It was a harmonious affair, since for the second time in the Triarchy's history, they actually had common goals. Underscore 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 un. It was time for the meet, so the SSC trio was led through the keep straight to the small council chamber. As they entered the room, they found themselves face to face with the following: Prince Baelon Targaryen, Prince Daemon Targaryen, Lord Corlys Velaryon, Lord Tyland Lannister, Lord Jasper Wilde, and finally, the unexpected Prince Aegon Targaryen. Drazenko found them to be quite comfortable in their own skin, experienced enough that they showed no signs of nervousness or anxiety. Even the youngest prince, who probably never participated in an affair of such size, did an admirable job hiding his nerves. They sat directly in front of the Westerosi side, warmly greeting them. Lords Rogaray, Rinduin, Lady Serena. Prince Baelon was the one who spoke to them. Greetings. Greetings, Your Grace. Drazen Co answered. It a pleasure to meet each and every one of you. The prince just nodded, before opening his large book to a random page. Likewise, but let's get straight to the meat of the matter, shall we? At their nods, he continued. In accordance with our envoy's message, the purpose of our meeting is to discuss a peaceful resolution to the matter of the stepstones. He says, reading from one of its pages. To that end, we would like to propose the cessation of tolls and tariffs enforced for all ships passing through the islands, which would exclude all other entities like the other free cities, of course. While they were shocked, the prince raises his head and warmly smiles at them. Let us have free and unfettered trade, shall we? Drazen Co didn't trust his mouth to answer, so he just stayed silent alongside his comrades. Of course, there are several concessions we would expect from the Triarchy in return for such a favorable deal, the least of which are the recognition of the Targaryen claim over the archipelago and the cessation of all support for the current pirates and privateers raiding our ships. Lord Corlys continues. Rakalio was the first to answer, Tyrosh being the one most threatened by a foreign power so close to their land. If that is true, then we would expect the permission for our fleet to patrol in order to protect our sovereign territory. Lord Tyland Lannister answers. As long as they house neither slaves nor slavers, then all ships are welcome to traverse the islands, with the knowledge that our Royal Navy is responsible for our protections. All slavers, poachers, pirates, and privateers are to be treated as hostile, and I will personally burn their ships to the ground. Daemon continues. Any and all ships of your non-mercantile navy can only cross through with prior warning, any who do not do so will have to both surrender and get judged for their actions, or they shall receive the same treatment as the others. The three envoys look to each other for a second, before Drazen Co turns back to speak. If we are to discuss your terms any further, we'd like to ask about your plan for the islands. He says. What will your approach be concerning their governance? Prince Baelon looks to his brother, who promptly begins reading from a piece of paper. A Lord Governor will be named by the king in order to manage the islands are needed. He flips through the parchment, intermittently reading parts from each one. There will be plans to build fortifications, small folk will be moved in order to create settlements to offer services, warehouses, supply depots and such are also to be constructed, and a major fleet to be built within the next 6 months will be under their jurisdiction and considered a branch of the Royal Navy. He finally looks up at them, reminiscent of his brother's actions at the beginning of the meeting. The fleet's primary function will be to offer protection for Westerosi merchant ships and transportation of goods for those without the means, in order to facilitate trade between the West and the East. He notes the sea snakes flinch at the mention of the new fleet. So he was planning to offer his ships to do the same thing, hey? Serena's eyes grow a gleam of greed. Those services, can they be offered for our merchants too? She asks. Indeed, Drazen Co was aware of his family's desire to look east for better opportunities, and yet the Triarchy was dependent on their merchant ships for survival. This means that a significant amount of investment is spent in order to keep a sizable navy in order to protect their traders, and if they could use the Westerosi navy to the same ends with a cheaper price, then it'll allow them to spend even more gold on their new ventures. Provided they aren't peddling flesh and that they pay good enough, then yes, I don't see why not. Aegon confidently answers. Lord Jasper laughs at his response. You should speak to Prince Aegon about further details at a later date, since he'll be named as Lord Governor for the Stepstones. He's the one responsible for the new fleet. Rogaray had to blink twice, so that was what the Lord Hand was alluding to. He shifted his gaze to the sea snake, and even though the man's expression was unchanging, Drazen Co knew that he'd be hurting inside. As the son of the High Tower Queen and a prince of the realm, Prince Aegon is perfectly poised to be a counterbalance against his interests. He then stared at Baelon, who simply laid back on his chair with a smile, letting the others take the rein of the negotiations. He must be the one behind that scheme, annulling the prince's marriage to his own sister, allowing him to participate in the negotiation with Dorne. Those were all in order to give his brother the necessary influence and fame to assume such a position. But the Rogaray just shrugged his shoulders. This is good for them, and Westerosi politics are soon to be none of his business. By the end of the meeting, when the sun was already down, they had come to several agreements. 1. The Seven Kingdoms will claim ownership over the Stepstones. 2. There is to be neither tariffs nor tolls for the shipping lanes, allowing for free trade between the two entities. 3. The Targaryens are free to negotiate their own conditions with the other free cities, they do own the islands after all. Drazen co-wagers it is to offer equal terms to the Bravasi. 4th, slave merchants are simply forbidden, and are to be treated as equal to pirates. Prince Daemon is to lead a separate fleet, responsible for proactively hunting all pirates and slavers across their sea borders. 5th and finally, a non-aggression treaty is to be signed by both parties, respecting their pertinent sovereignty over their territories, and any breach of that treaty is to be declared as a declaration of war. The specific details are to be hammered over the next week, but all in all, the Rogaray surmised it to be a favorable deal. The cessation of tolls alone assures that. So he went to his guest quarters with a spring in his step. Chapter 24, Maester Baelor I. Author's note, still very busy, but I managed to get another chapter in. Check out my Patreon for 5 advanced chapters, and I hope you have a wonderful time. Patreon, patreon.com/Nivelhema. Underscore 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 un. The sound of a quill scratching at parchment silently echoed in the chamber. Violet flowers sat at the maester's tower of dragonstone, a cozy space. It was filled with leather-covered books, scattered scrolls, and unfinished trinkets. Yet each and every object was in order. Violet ceases writing for a moment, flexing his arm and fingers to relieve stiffness and tension. My arms are to fall out at this point. Maester Violet found himself with an increasing amount of duties. The prince's new position at the capital meant that he had to take Robert Quince and most of his subordinates in order to assure order in the city. However, by no means did they leave them dry. The matters of administration in the island are so streamlined that the skeleton crew left by His Grace was more than enough to handle it, and with the raised literacy due to the increase of educated slave refugees, there was more than enough loyal, skilled scribes and stewards capable of filling any gaps to be filled. Additionally, Sir Alfred Broom took over as the new castellan. The now much mellower knight was an excellent master of arms, and he directed the military assets within the fief with admirable skills, leaving all administrative and logistical matters for the actual experts. He was actually happy for once, which was logical. Violet couldn't imagine the stereotypical Westerosi vassal being happy fulfilling those tasks. No, the actual reason for his tired expression wasn't such trivialities, it was actually due to the prince's desire for progress in terms of useful innovations. The Dragonslayer's mind for useful applications and his eye for hidden yet obvious breakthroughs were as astounding as ever, causing the success rates of their experiments to be much more successful than expected. Some failed, of course. Like the so-called black powder of UTI, which turned out to be but a hoax, it certainly created enough hot air to match what maesters were able to gauge out of a wildfire explosion. Yet it was just flammable enough to reach the threshold of speed of combustion needed to create an explosion without reaching it. The prince had thought to test it even more thoroughly, expecting that with the right ratio of ingredients then the substance would succeed, yet it never did. He strangely seemed both gladdened and disappointed with the results. I had so many things in mind for this black powder, were it to work. Yet maybe it is for the best that it didn't. He had commented. There were some other failures, like gold plating through strangely enough dipping gold in an acid and attaching it with copper wire. He didn't know how, but their initial experiments worked. Unfortunately though, there was something queer going about the process, as it seemed to cause the coated object to quickly fall apart from the inside. Yet for every failure, there were many more successes, new farming methods, new methods to create dyes, spirits that have been dubbed as firewater by sailors for its ability to get you drunk with a cup, very useful in cleansing wounds and preventing infection, liquid rock, blast furnaces, the compass. All of these brought untold riches to the Targaryen prince, their exact nature hidden as secret knowledge, never to be shared. Unfortunately for Vaelor, a huge amount of those riches gets reinvested by Baelon for even more experiments, increasing both he and his acolytes' workload to great lengths. Speaking of acolytes, one of them, with a decent-sized chain composed of a majority of pale steel, smithing, links alongside some brass, history, copper, history, gold, general knowledge, and black iron, ravenry or communication, in 1 and 2s, entered his room. It was enough to be promoted to a maester, certainly, yet the Citadel is in truth a deeply political institute, causing many knowledgeable and exceptional acolytes to be left behind. Vaelor had enough backing or the illusion of one that he was promoted at the young age of 6 and 10, while he was considered very knowledgeable for his age at the time, his links were but the bare minimum needed for a promotion. So when the prince sent him a raven telling him about his assignment as Lord of Dragonstone, urging him to be his castle's maester while dragging along as many promising acolytes as ever, Vaelor ecstatically did so, bringing with him a gaggle of skilled but unmotivated acolytes, who had their path upwards cut off by too much passion or unfortunate circumstances. Now that their discoveries, directed by the prince's wisdom, are slowly getting disseminated through the crownlands and into the world, many of them who went through the same experiences saw an opportunity for something better, causing their number of educated subordinates to see a great increase in manpower. Let us not talk of the skilled artisans freed from slavery, the expensive yet immensely knowledgeable Bravasi shipwrights, and all sorts of expert scholars and learned people looking for greener pastures. All of these people, coming under his jurisdiction, all proud intellectuals stubborn in their old ways, demanding more funds for projects and arguing with each other over the slightest slights. The sad thing about this situation is that it wasn't his proximity to the prince that accorded him this position, but simply the fact that he was most suitable for the role. As a young man, Vaelor came to a singular conclusion in his studies: knowledge is only useful if it can be used, no matter its origin. A not so rare perspective, but one that caused him to diversify in his studies, gathering links in most fields available, even including Valyrian steel. The prince had a neat expression for it: a jack of all trades, he said. That made him capable of at least holding a conversation with learned men of most fields. Economics, medicine, engineering, and smithing were his forte, perfect for managing all different projects in wildly different fields. Maester. The acolyte spoke. Ships with Targaryen banners have been sighted over the horizon, with Sunfire Prince Aegon's dragon circling them. The reason why he was informed for something like the arrival of these ships was because they were expected for different reasons. The first reason for the anticipation is related to Prince Baelon's recent presence in King's Landing. After weeks and weeks of negotiating, His Grace has managed to convince the Alchemist Guild to be annexed under his banner, to receive his direct patronage but also follow his instructions. At first, they firmly opposed the decision, but blinded by the prospect of a prominent sponsor, a superior version of Paramore the Twisted, they not only did so, but they also conceded to the prince and therefore Vaelor's complete authority. Threats of dragon fire may or may not have been used. The other reason, and one that didn't really concern him much, is that with the Targaryens' official ownership of the Stepstones getting announced, 2 modest fleets were to be built or gathered for their defense. The first will be under the leadership of the Rogue Prince, leading offensive actions against pirates, slavers, and all kinds of evildoers, composed of Valyrian captains and sailors, their ships rented from the Sea Snake by the royal family for a respectable sum and a portion of the loot. This decision was made due to the close relationship between Prince Daemon and House Valyrian, through his former marriage to their late daughter, and the subsequent marriage of their daughter-in-law. In addition, the prince and the Valyrian navy were familiar with each other thanks to the war on the Stepstones. That same strategy cannot be used for the Second Fleet, since they were to be put under the Lord Governor of the Stepstones, and with that nominally being Prince Aegon, neither him and his family nor the Valyrians would appreciate such a notion. There was a proposal, however, of using his motherly backing to imitate the other fleet's formation, but that strategy was used in order to prioritize speed and lower costs. Prince Daemon's mission is predicted to be a temporary measure in order to break enemy morale, whilst the Lord Governor's was to be used on a more permanent basis as a force of stability for the region. The plan is for the rogue prince to decimate the pirates still plaguing the Stepstones while the second fleet of ships was leisurely getting built and sailors were being trained. Naturally, they needed to do so in a place in close proximity to the narrow sea, whilst having great loyalty to the Targaryen family. King's Landing's ports are still getting renovated, and the recent surge in trade caused whatever is usable to be filled to the brim with merchant ships and the Royal Navy's fleet. And with Dragonstone's recent capability to build naval vessels, warships or otherwise, it was the obvious choice. Prince Aegon's presence wasn't expected, however. While he was named Lord Governor of the Stepstones, everyone expected him to only actually hold the mantle until a few years later when he grows more skilled and familiar with the position. Valyr turns to the acolyte. "Thank you, Weston." He dismisses him as he leaves, swiftly heading to the castle's exit into the commonly named Dragon's Path, the gigantic road that leads from the docks straight to the gates of the city. It is the most travelled road in Dragonstone, like the trunk of a tree that connects the roots to the branches. Once he reached the docks, he found a dour-faced man in full plate armor standing before a contingent of purple cloaks. When he noticed Valyr's approach, the man nodded in greetings. "Maester," he said. "Sir Broom." They weren't close, Broom and Valyr. They shared a common goal in their loyalty to their liege, yes, but they didn't have anything in common, causing them to have quite a considerable distance between them. So they stayed quiet, waiting for the guests to arrive. Before the ships were in sight, a great shadow covered the sun's rays all throughout the Dragon's Path and toward the towering Dragon Mont. Sunfire Prince Aegon's dragon was the most beautiful dragon Valyr laid eyes on. It had gleaming scales that shone like beaten gold in the cover of the sun, while his pink membranes were a nice contrast to the shining color, giving an air of elegance. He squints his eyes, trying to take a gander at its back. His untrained eyes were barely able to sense the absence of its rider, indicating that the prince is to be with the ships. It wasn't long before the ships followed. They were some 15 ships, a mix of cogs and galleys, disembarking in the port at the same time. The biggest and most intimidating one was a familiar sight to the maester's eyes. The Braveheart was a ship captained by one of Dragonstone's earliest sailor recruits and one of their best, a loyal man tasked with leading important trade missions and defending merchant ships in the area from pirates. The Prince Aegon seemed sickly from the sea travel. The last time he saw him leaving a ship he was also vomiting, yet at the time he wagered it was more from excess of drink rather than a lack of affinity with the sea. The Aegon of the Year of the Red Spring was no more, however. The prince was still thin and lanky, yet his skin tone was no longer pale and his eyes lacked the permanent shade that gave him a lethargic appearance. Most importantly, however, was the way he comported himself. With measured movements, confident steps, and a tall posture, the boy prince was a boy no more, holding eye contact with a menacing knight like Sir Alfred Broom with ease, and Valyr actually saw him make a squire wet his pants with a glare once. The receiving party naturally bowed to royalty. "Your Grace," they echoed. "No need for formalities, here," Aegon said. "Please stand." "Your Grace, unfortunately we weren't aware of your arrival. If we had, we would have prepared a more appropriate reception. I prefer it this way, actually." His eyes scanned the crowd before finally settling on Valyr. "Maester Valyr, was it?" "Yes, Your Grace," he responded. "I hear you will be deeply involved with the building of what is to be my fleet." The prince says. "I would deeply enjoy getting familiar with the process." He turned toward the sailors working at the deck of the ship. "I'd also like to observe their training, to get familiar with them." Valyr hesitated to speak. "Excuse me for my uncouth remarks, my prince. he says. But isn't your grace supposed to stay in King's Landing for the foreseeable future? One would assume you to be too young and inexperienced to take charge of your position. The surrounding men tensed in surprise. Vaelor was right, his words were incredibly presumptuous, and his question very inappropriate. Yet the prince simply waved it off. I agree, he said. I am to learn, yes. But to do so optimally I need to be present in the thick of it. Observing more experienced administrators and diplomats should prove to be an incredible opportunity to gather experience. I know my limits, my uncle is the one undergoing the hard work. He finished with a light note, putting the men more at ease. He definitely changed for the better. That was a thought that echoed through the spectators' heads, especially those who were present 2 years ago. I am about to receive the Alchemist Guild, Your Grace, he said. How about accompanying them on a tour of the facilities? The prince nodded with a smile. That would be most wonderful. Chapter 25, Wisdom Gunter I. Author's note, one-eyed, 2 disappointing episodes and 1 chapter. That sounds like the beginning of one of Tyrion's jokes. No, but seriously, I'm starting to worry about the season 2 of the series. They whitewashed so many things, Lucerys and Jaehaerys, boy. Death should have been intentional. Alicent shouldn't have F***ed Cole, although I get why they put that there, and Aemon/Daemon weren't sufficiently fucked up / intimidating. I loved Aegon/Haliana/Hugh/Alan/Adam/Corlys/Rhaenys/Jaehaerys though, whenever they show up on the screen I get happy jitters. If you didn't notice by now, then I'll tell you, Aegon is sorta the main character of the current phase in the story. I like to think he's what the real Aegon could have turned out with a good older figure beside him. All hail Aegon the Dragoncock! Check out my Patreon for 5 advanced chapters, and I hope you have a wonderful time. Patreon, patreon.com/Nivelheima. Underscore 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 un. Gunter stared at the back of the Grand Master as he wobbled out of the ship, shortly buckling down in order to empty the contents of his stomach. The old man slowly stood back up, wiping the corner of his mouth with a handkerchief. Bloody Targaryens, look what they made out of us. Another wisdom, and one of their leader's former acolytes, spoke in warning. Grand Master, we are in Dragonstone, it would be wise to keep such words to ourselves. Bollocks! That damned prince threatens our livelihoods and demands servitude from our order, going against hundreds of years of tradition and secrecy. The geezer was undeterred, however. If the survival of our guild wasn't at stake, I wouldn't have put us in such a situation. Out of their 30-ish gaggle of learned men, only a few seemed to outwardly agree with their leader. The rest alongside the small folk in their vicinity seemed really uncomfortable hearing his words, some of them unabashedly glaring at him. Gunter was the same. Out of the many wisdoms of the Alchemist Guild, he was one of the most influential, mainly due to the fact that he was bringing a ton of gold to their coffers. He wasn't a flame-crazed obsessive fool, the only reason he chose the guild instead of the Order of Maesters was the lack of oaths. He never regretted his decision, of course, but he found himself at odds with his colleagues' almost fanatical obsession with the substance as they called it. As a wisdom, he was naturally familiar with wildfire, yet his mercantile success came from leveraging their knowledge for other fields. Taking inspiration from the new Dragonstone products, Gunter sought to create new types of perfume, modify dye-making processes into cheaper ones, and attempt to integrate their magical expertise into their other products. The latter didn't see much success. The Order's magical knowledge is limited to the sorcerous aspects of wildfire, after all. But he found much success in his other ideas, making him second in the Order only behind the Grand Master in terms of influence. His help was crucial in convincing the others into ceding to the prince's demands. He noticed that his grace seemed to get more and more annoyed by their continued stubbornness, so in fear of physical retaliation, he convinced the others to listen for once. It was difficult, but he was successful. Now they find themselves under new leadership, and hopefully the Order's priorities will shift to a direction much more in tune with his goals. Who is to receive us? That dumb old fogey was still prattling on. Are we so unimportant that they'll leave us here to rot? Not at all. An unfamiliar voice interjected. He turned to see its source, only to find a young maester with Valyrian features. This must be Maester Violar. Next to him was a young teenager, wearing luxurious yellow velvet doublet, with elaborate green embroidery depicting dragons. Apologies for my late greeting, I was much too busy receiving his grace. Maester Violar explains. And not at all, we are grateful to be in the presence of his grace. The Grand Master stuttered out, bowing alongside the rest towards the prince. In their way to the islands, the sight of the majestic dragon circling their small fleet of ships was apparent, yet everyone figured that the prince had nothing to do with their arrival and that they would not meet him. No one expected to come face to face with royalty. I found myself interested into the source of the innovative ideas coming from this island, and the kind maester indulged my desire. He said, "Do be comfortable, much like you, I am here only to observe." "Of course, your grace." They echoed. "Without further ado, would you follow me?" They were led to a group of carriages, who carried them all through the crowded town into the direction of the Dragon Mont. Wisdom Gunter and the Grand Master had the privilege to be seated next to the Maester and the Prince. Aegon stared out of the window, noticing their distant destination. "Where do we seem to be going? I assumed the journey would end somewhere in the city," he asked. The Maester smiled indulgently at the Prince. "Prince Baelon thought it to be prudent for our experimentations to be conducted away from onlookers or possible spies. Our experiments can be either dangerous or secretive, hence the isolation." "I see, and what would be the reason for having them at the Dragon Mont? Won't the Dragon Seekers object to that?" Gunter found himself thankful for the prince's presence. He was asking questions that Gunter wanted to. "An astute question, your grace," the maester answered. "We built our base in the Dragon Mont for several reasons. One is its geographical position. There was a small river with a strong flow in proximity going into the sea and mountains filled with old expansive tunnels that hid us from the wind and the rain. Secondly, is that Xyrux, the prince's dragon, used to make the range its territory, and even with its absence surrounding dragons and hatchlings still respect its boundaries, allowing us to evade their wrath." He finished speaking just as their carriage stopped. "Ah, it seems we have arrived." They were led outside, gazing at the site of their destination. "Welcome, to the workshop," he comments. The area was obviously flattened through some means. The suspiciously straight ground seemed to spontaneously turn to the south into hills all of a sudden, and the range would extend all the way into the shore to the east. A small river would separate the settlement into two, going out of the plateaus into the sea. The sound of flowing water was strong when you walked close to it, denoting the strength of its flow. Gunter couldn't help but marvel at the sheer liveliness he was witnessing. Many men and women of many ethnicities and styles of dress walked through the region. There was a makeshift village built around and into the mountain. The whole hill was dug into house-shaped protrusions, doubtlessly housing many people. There were other structures built around it all the way to the river. What came to attention was the lack of common men. Every person he saw had neither the look nor the presence of a typical small folk. All around him there were men discussing over books and working on contraptions, whilst a significant amount of purple cloaks stood guard, protecting them and observing them in equal measure. "First, I'd like to show you our metal workers, so follow me into the river." They did so, until they came to see the lively sight of blacksmiths hammering and working on metals, gathering around queer structures. There seemed to be two types, one which seemed like large clay cylindrical structures. They were attached to water wheels spinning through the rivers, which were used to blow the giant bellows that fueled its giant hearth. A charging hole was attached to its pot, whereupon men would put in materials such as iron ore, charcoal, or limestone. Maester Violar pointed to them. "Those are our new blast furnaces, they are capable of producing significant amounts of pig iron over a short period of time, roughly 1 or 2 tons per day. He smiled. This was but one of the first ones to be made. More powerful, newer types, to be built on the banks of the Blackwater or in the north, can go up to tens of tons per day. How much did he say? No wonder those purple cloaks were all decked in plate armor. Gunther speechlessly thought. Aegon was less impressed, however. He wasn't versed in the minutiae of iron production and wasn't capable of gauging the scale of this new method, yet he was capable to roughly sense its importance through observing the alchemist's expressions. Vaelor ignored their reactions, pointing to the second contraption. This is a steel converter. Using a new type of refined coal we call coke, we are able to more easily refine pig iron into steel. Its size and efficacy would usually convert most of our iron into steel, allowing us to use it to much greater ease. Most of the steel produced here is made into ingots and distributed to the many blacksmiths and such in order to create needed tools and weapons. Our goal is to experiment. After all, the only reason these ones are still in use is because we use great amounts of steel for other experiments. He points to a particular area, where a man was layering molten steel over an already quenched piece. That, for example, is an effort at producing a new type of steel that seems to be able to be used in making lighter and sharper weapons. Every experiment is an investment, but we also value the freedom to chase one's passion. He stares at the group of alchemists. As long as your goals are deemed useful in one way or another, a certain amount of resources is going to be granted to you for its research, and you will be granted many rewards should you succeed. He mindlessly turns, leaving them to stew on the new revelation. Let us visit the next area. For the next few hours they were shown the different parts of the premises. The word workshop described the place perfectly. Every moment, dozens if not hundreds of experiments were conducted, each one allowing them to better their methods ever so slightly, to innovate new processes and creations. Throughout their tour, Gunther couldn't help but think on the maester's words. The Alchemists' Guild was never wealthy enough to throw money at experiments. They tried to do what they could, yet the nature of their products weren't really productive for further developments. However, this new opportunity could be the impetus of change, their way of pushing their knowledge to the next level. The guild was old. They started off as former Valyrian slaves educated enough and sneaky enough to remember some of their methods and use them for their ends. The doom of Valyria, however, took away most of that knowledge, only leaving some bits here and there. During the centuries they didn't really manage to improve much. Their lack of an actual foundation of knowledge and the taboo put on it after the fall of the Valyrians made them ostracized by all possible customers. It was almost a miracle, and definitively an accident, that they were able to discover wildfire, the discovery giving them great fame and influence at the beginning. A flame as potent as a dragon's breath had the SSC houses salivating, yet they soon discovered the impracticality of the substance. Wildfire was just too uncontrollable, too potent. And yet the guild had already cemented a tradition of dependency on it. All resources and research was put to making it even worse, hotter, stronger, and with a faster spread. Their last resorts were the Targaryens, so when Aegon the Conqueror took over Westeros, they created another branch in the small town of King's Landing, which as time went on managed to barely stand on its feet. The SSC branches were not so lucky, however. And now things are different. As the exhibition almost came to an end, the alchemists found themselves even more surprised. New chemical processes that made new perfumes, spirits, and dyes. Liquid rock, obsidian jewelry, a compass that points north, and more. Every discovery made them speechless. If these people were able to do this, what could they, the alchemist, discover? The prince, however, found himself increasingly bored no matter how much he tried to focus, so when Maester Vaelor addressed him he was startled a bit. "I think this will interest you, Your Grace. The workshop is home to a shipyard. It is here where your fleet is to be built." A gleam of interest made its way on the prince's eyes. "Lead the way." The shipyard was another odd sight since it was built inside the cliffside. Strangely round tunnels were dug into, with support structures and access points built for launching and maintaining ships. It was also the most crowded, people working on making, maintaining, and repairing ships in different sized tunnels. They gawked at the ship's designs, some looked way too unfamiliar, yet they can fit into two categories. The first was probably a type of galley, a large oared warship characterized by its sleek design, multiple banks of oars, and a single mast with a square sail. Gunter would wager the second to be a small, highly maneuverable sailing ship that had a narrow hull, lateen sails, and a combination of square and lateen rigging. This one, we call a dromond. The combination of oars and sails and its sleek frame allows it to be much faster than typical galleys while carrying roughly the same weight. It requires a larger amount of sailors in comparison, but it is a fair trade. They can be rowed at great speeds as long as there are no turns, and to take advantage of that trade it is equipped with a beak-shaped ramming device at its prow. He explains the first. They should prove to be formidable warships for your future fleet, Your Grace. Aegon simply nods. The second was named a caravel. It is practically the opposite of a dromond. Small and maneuverable, this type of ship is as fast as the rumored swan ships of the Summer Islands, making them optimal for trade and exploration. Both these types of ship are not known by anyone else, they are used locally around the islands but shall be first presented to the world under your command. Now, if you would follow me, there is one last design I wish to show you. They were met with an aged man first, who gruffly greeted them with a grunt. Master Farrago, is it docked? Vaelor mysteriously asks. Yes, it needs more work, yet I think it will do for a demonstration. The man spoke with a distinct Valyrian accent. Bravacy. Gunter thought. He leads them even deeper into the dock. At the distance they were able to see the side of a gigantic tunnel. The prince's dragon himself dug this tunnel, we couldn't do so ourselves in a short enough period. What are you showing us, Maester? Aegon asks. His Grace told me to not say, he enjoys surprises, as you know. The prince snorts, no longer questioning him. Then they saw it. Gunter lived in King's Landing, he saw many kinds of ships, small and large, yet none were as big as this monstrosity before him. In his humble estimates, Gunter would say that it was around 150 feet, 4-5 m, in length, a beam, width, of 45 feet, 1-4 m. He slightly leaned down, glanced at its submerged part, he would put its draft at 20 feet, 6 m. That, what is that? Aegon incredulously asks. It's as big as a fortress. Sounds of chalked agreements echo at his statement, that ship was very large, it was a wonder how it could float in the first place, let alone sail. That, is a belated name-day gift from Prince Baelon to you, Your Grace. He says. And is to be the flagship of your new fleet. He shouldn't have. Aegon softly comments. Vaelor just ignores him. This is a galleon, the first legitimate one to be made, a large, multi-decked sailing ship with 4 masts, square-rigged sails, copper sheathing for the hull, and scorpion bolters attached to its lowest deck. He says. It is faster than you might think, yet still quite slow, so the scorpion bolts are capable of latching to other ships through the use of chains, which is attached to a lever that can be used to actually pull entire ships to close proximity. It should take a couple of months to get finished, the 300 sailors that are going to man it are training at this very moment. The Bravacy shipwright continues. What would you like to name it, Your Grace? Can you paint it in red and gold? At the man's nod, he continues. Then I'd like to name it the Sun's Glare, after Sunfire. He turns to Vaelor, an emotional look in his eyes. I want to visit the sailors next, I'd like to see the people who are going to be using my brother's gift. Vaelor shrugs. I have no knowledge of that side of things, Your Grace. He answers. You will be better served asking Sir Alfred Broom, he is usually responsible for the training of soldiers, sailors, or otherwise. Aegon nods. Then I bid you farewell. He leaves, only now does Gunther notice the many soldiers trailing behind them, who follow the prince back to the castle. Underscore 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 un. After that whole debacle, Vaelor takes them to their wing of the workshop, a space supposedly reserved for their use. This is naturally even more isolated than our other spaces. He comments. I thought it to be a prudent countermeasure considering the delicate nature of your products. Gunther hums in thought as his gaze perused the contents of the space. It was an open area, connected to the shore for easy access to water, alongside several simple buildings for housing and a small warehouse for storing their resources. He could still hear the sound of the workers of the dockyard, making its proximity apparent. He leads them into the warehouse, mentioning for the many materials neatly put inside. I made the liberty of preparing some ingredients, I hope we were accurate. Gunther notices quicklime, brimstone, rosin, and tar. Alongside several exotic herbs and storages filled with blood. He takes a whiff. Pig blood. He thinks. He wasn't the only one to notice the similarities. How? Their Grand Master exclaims. The ingredients of the substance are supposed to be our greatest secret. Vaelor smiles reproachfully. We simply follow the gold. I understand that your knowledge of economics may not be the best, but even if you try to sneak in the real ingredients amidst your purchases, just randomly buying some isn't bound to cut it. He said. The prince is the de facto ruler of the city you live in, and much of what you buy is actually offered by our merchants. It was a simple affair to analyze the records and deduce your recipe by the regularity of your purchases and the nature of the ingredients. He says. You are in fact lucky that we made sure to hide them, having the knowledge of how to make wildfire spread is not a good prospect for us. Gunther chuckles nervously. Thank you, for your kind gesture. He says, before that old fuck could ruin things to hell. Good. The Maester says. Now, these are your instructions. You are not to share what you see, hear, or know about this place. It doesn't matter if you get drunk, or if someone is holding your family hostage. If a single word or story spreads through your lips, then these gentlemen he mentions to the surrounding purple cloaks menacingly staring at them, would easily fix the problem. At their nervous faces, Vaelor nods in satisfaction before continuing. Your main first task is simple. Your primary product, wildfire, is too unwieldy, we need you to tame it. That is impossible. The Grand Master runs his mouth, again. The substance is a material of chaos, of destruction. To try to diminish that would border on heresy. He spat out. Vaelor stares with complete apathy. I do not care, neither does the prince. A sword without a handle is useless, and one made of Valyrian steel is also idiotic. If you do not manage to tame wildfire, or at least make it usable with considerable safety, then we will take the useful ones out of the bunch, while the rest would be dismissed. I cannot accept. Especially from a grey rat. He prattles on again, the spit falling off of his mouth. I will not desecrate my reputation for such stupidity. With my authority as Grand Master, no one will. Gunther had enough, so he simply punched the senile fuck in the face. He was no warrior, his fist was slow and clumsy, but the man was already far past his prime, falling to the ground like bag of bricks. He massages his arm mindlessly. Sorry for the buffoon's misconduct. Now that there is a new authority to answer to, there is no longer any need to act respectfully to the old one. I believe the rest of us can be more adequate for the task. The rest of the acolytes and wisdoms nod in agreement. Seeing that, Vaelor smiles in interest. That is fine, do you have any additional requests? Gunther thinks for a moment. Any books on Valyrian alchemy would be most helpful. He finally settles. Vaelor nods. I believe Dragonstone has one or two in its library, and we will also ask our merchants to look out for others." He answers. "Any additional requests can be relayed through any of the purple cloaks, Wisdom Gunter. I hope we shall have an amicable relationship." The maester extends his arm. Gunter finishes the handshake. "So do I." In the future, Gunter would be known for his legendary discoveries in the realms of alchemy. He would preach the concept of innovation for the sake of direct applications, and would be crucial in the rise of the workshop as the second major center of knowledge in Westerosi history. Chapter 26, Daemon II. Author's note: here's another chapter. To be frank, even though I have felt the desire to write a lot lately, the disappointing state of the House of the Dragon TV show meant that I feel somewhat unmotivated when it comes to this story, but I promised you chapters, and so chapters you will get. I did like how Rhaenyra looked in a septa outfit, but that goddamned scene was just so awfully bad. I also didn't like that Rook's Nest wasn't a plan orchestrated by Aegon and Aemond both, and that the only reason Aegon was there was because he was too drunk. It not only made him seem useless, which I guess is fair, but most importantly it made Rhaenys look like a suicidal Dumbo instead of the tenacious, expert dragon rider that she was in the books. Sunfire steals the show. Can't wait for that lil puppy to get his Targaryen snack though. Check out my Patreon for 5 advanced chapters, and I hope you have a wonderful time. Patreon, patreon.com/Nivelhema. ________________________ Daemon mindlessly parries a short wooden sword. He swiftly moves his own, hitting the handle of his opponent's. "Don't get too eager," he warns. Lucerys takes a couple of deep breaths, wordlessly grabbing his fallen sword, preparing for another bout. Daemon notes his exhaustion. He mentions to one of the guard with his head, prompting him to throw him a waterskin. "We're done for the day, take some rest." The boy sighs in relief as he almost drops in the side of the yard. "You're..." he gasps. "You're relentless, good father." The prince takes a large sip from the waterskin before throwing it at his son. "If I am to prepare you for the battlefield, then you need to get used to this at least." Baelon was a man of his word. At Rhaenyra's urging, the rogue prince became a constant figure in Lucerys' life, as a mentor and a protector both. To be honest, Daemon was pretty impressed. In the absence of his older brother, the kid spent most of his time in the yard, training with older squires and watching knights spar. That effort clearly had an effect. Lucerys was already pretty talented with the sword, and talent tempered by effort makes the sharpest swords. "So, good father," Lucerys says. "I hear you're to leave on the morrow?" he asks. Daemon silently hums in agreement. The boy hesitates to speak, but he firms his resolve and does so anyway. Can you take me with you?" Daemon shifts his gaze to the boy. "No," he says, turning to take another sip from the skin. "Why is that?" The rogue prince clicks his tongue. "You're too young. And you mother would slit my throat." Lucerys huffs and pouts. "Jace gets to spend time with grandfather while I have to stay here. Plus, Aegon gets to go too." Daemon stands up and walks away. Lucerys is undeterred however, walking alongside him, complaining all the way. They finally step in front of a particular room, his wife's room, and enter. "Your son wants to leave to war, dear," he says. The way Rhaenyra looks up from her embroidery and glares at her son chilled the blood in his veins. She stands up swiftly, walking towards him with heavy steps. "Ow, ow ow ow!" Lucerys exclaims, his mother pinching his ear in punishment. "Is that right? You think you're a man grown enough to spill blood?" "No," the boy tries to reason, the fool. "You're decades too young to talk back at me, foolish boy," she says. "If I hear one more word about such foolishness I will tan your hide. Now go take a bath, you smell like a used rag." Lucerys gets led outside the room by a couple of servants, while his mother turns to Daemon. She looks up to Daemon. "Thank you for this," she says. "I'll recompensate you for this, one day." He held her waist. "I can think of a way. Underscore 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 underscore. Do you have to go?" His wife held his newborn son in one hand, Viserys, whilst little Aegon held her other. "I need you, here, with me," she says. Daemon's smile was tinged with sadness. He holds a palm over her cheek, slowly caressing it. Rhaenyra's birth took a toll. Much like her mother, she wasn't suited for childbirth. "I cannot stay idle, Isahora Lagan," he softly says. "If I spend one more day in this city, I might as well cut my own throat." She clinches his sleeve tightly. "Then take me with you. If you think you have it miserable here, then my life is an experience in misery," she urges. "If not the stepstones, then Driftmark. Both my brother and those green leeches are sapping the strength out of me." Aegon already drifted off his mother's hand, wandering the hall followed by a gaggle of nurses, doing what children do. "What about Lucerys?" Daemon spent a long time with the boy at her request, assuring his safety. Yet he realized that his presence was largely unnecessary. Baelon was taking good care of him, and the boy found his place in the Red Keep. Rhaenyra's face scrunched up. "Why is it only now that you become the logical one?" she complains. "Where did the Daemon who waged a war to throw a tantrum? I got married." Her face momentarily turns deadpan. "Funny. Goodbye, Daemon. See you soon." Underscore 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 un. He flew over the island of Grey Gallows, expecting to find pirates manning its premises. There were men pillaging, robbing, and thrashing the place, but they were no pirates, they were iron-born reavers. Caraxes spins over the camp for a while. Daemon was able to see the banners of a golden kraken over a black field. "Great joys!" he murmurs. He softly urges his dragon to swerve toward an empty stretch of land, right in the middle of the camp. By the time Caraxes' feet touched the ground, a crowd was already gathered around it. "You're a brave I Targaryen." One of them began to speak. He was tall and heavy, with scars marring his face. "Common air all alone." Daemon ignored him. He searched the place with his gaze, finding a familiar tall, dark-haired handsome man as he instructed a boy of less than 10 on how to strip a corpse. That familiar face was Aegon Greyjoy, the current regent of his house. The young boy to his side shared superficial similarities with the man, which must be his nephew, Dalton Greyjoy. He made to approach the man, yet the brash one that he ignored bristled in offense, unsheathing his sword. "Ye may be a prince, but no one will speak of what'll be done to ye," he shouted. The fool made a miscalculation, as Daemon didn't even bother to turn to him before the intimidating raider got crushed below one of Caraxes' claws. "Make sure to check his socks," the man informs the young boy. "Sailors tend to hide a lot of shit in there." As Daemon stepped forward, his gaze locked with Aegon Greyjoy's. The two men exchanged nods of acknowledgement amidst the chaos of the camp. "Aegon," Daemon called out as he approached, his voice carrying authority but also a hint of disdain. "It seems we find ourselves on the same shores once again." Aegon's expression remained stoic, but there was a spark of recognition in his eyes. "I, Daemon Targaryen. What brings the rogue prince to Grey Gallows?" Daemon didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I seek allies in reclaiming the stepstones. And from the looks of it, you and your Ironborn have already made yourselves quite comfortable here." Aegon's lips curled into a smirk. "We have a knack for making ourselves at home wherever the sea touches. But what's in it for us, Targaryen? I offer you the opportunity to unleash your reavers upon the stepstones once more," Daemon replied, his voice carrying a hint of promise. "Raid to your heart's content, as long as you pledge your ships and swords to our cause." The Greyjoy's grin widened at the prospect. He mulls the idea for a moment. "You have a deal, but on one condition: we take what we want, when we want. No interference." Daemon nodded in agreement. "Agreed. Now, let us discuss our plans further." As they began to strategize, one of Daemon's Valyrian sailors approached, urgency etched on his face. "My prince," the sailor said, bowing slightly. "We've received word of a significant fleet presence near the island of Bloodstone." "Pirates?" Daemon's brow furrowed at the news. "I thought the cowards would flee from the island. It seems they are foolishly attempting to resist." Without waiting for an answer, he turned back to Origen. "It seems a target made itself available for you barbarians." Dash. The scene shifted to the rocky shores of Bloodstone, where Caraxes soared overhead, unleashing torrents of dragon fire upon the enemy ships anchored close to the shore. The wooden vessels erupted in flames, their crews scrambling in panic as Daemon's fury rained down upon them. Amidst the chaos, the enemy pirate captain, a fearsome figure known for his ruthlessness, cowered behind a barricade of crates, his bravado crumbling in the face of the dragon's wrath. Yet, despite his fear, a glint of desperation flashed in his eyes as he emerged from his hiding spot, brandishing his Valyrian steel weapon, a thin sword with a moonstone pommel, as if hoping to intimidate his opponent with the mere sight of the blade. "Daemon Targaryen," the admiral called out, his voice carrying across the crashing waves. "Dismount your dragon and face me like a true warrior." Daemon's lips curved into a smirk as he stared down at the man, dismounting Caraxes, unsheathing his own sword. "As you wish." The two warriors face each other on the sandy shore, the hubbub of combat silence to their ears. A big wave rocked the ship, causing the rogue prince to stumble in his place. The pirate moved first, taking advantage of the favorable situation, his feet much more used to the swaying of ships. But Daemon was an experienced man, and much more skilled thereafter, so he managed to deftly parry his opponent's swing, the clash of Valyrian steel creating an unholy screech that deafened their ears. The prince noticed that for all his speed, his opponent was shorter and weaker than him, so leveraging his advantage, he went to the offense, sending blow after blow toward his opponent. It was here where his experience was shown. The pirate captain wasn't used to wielding a Valyrian sword, and even though he was adept in its usage, the man clearly had never clashed with another wielder. Parrying with a Valyrian steel sword is an easy thing, its light weight allows it to be easily maneuvered in order to parry, and just positioning the edge toward an enemy sword would mean that they would destroy their own weapons against yours. Yet when two Valyrian swords clash, the situation is different. The steel's lightweight properties become much more a burden than an advantage, and even though you could put the sword in your enemy's path, you cannot leverage your weapon much, so your arm gets blown away alongside it. That was what allowed Daemon to win. He pushed more force into his blows, forcing his opponent to be open to a follow-up attack. And with a swift slash, the pirate captain lost his head. With the enemy's forces scattered and their leader vanquished, Daemon turned to see the iron-born ships closing in on the horizon. Origen Greyjoy stood at the prow of his flagship, a fierce grin on his face. "Looks like we've got some plundering to do," Origen shouted, his voice carrying over the crashing waves. Daemon nodded, a sense of satisfaction coursing through him. With Bloodstone firmly liberated, Origen led the Ironborn as they raided and plundered the island with ruthless efficiency. Buildings were set ablaze, ships were looted, and any semblance of resistance was swiftly crushed. The screams of the defeated echoed across the island as the Ironborn left destruction in their wake, reveling in the chaos they wrought. As the dust settled and the smoke cleared, a disgruntled Valyrian sailor approached Daemon, concern etched on his face. "My prince," he began tentatively, "the Ironborn have gone too far. They've razed the entire island, destroyed homes, and killed or raped all the small folk." Daemon regarded the sailor with a cool gaze before waving him off dismissively. "War is not won by sentimentality, sailor. This is the price of victory. Amidst the chaos, Dalton Greyjoy, a mere 8 years old but already showing signs of his family's ferocity, wandered through the battlefield. His young eyes gleamed with a disturbing mix of curiosity and malice as he swept through the carnage, gathering whatever valuables he could find. He followed alongside the Ironborn's path. Whenever he saw a corpse he'd approach and stab it in the heart, assuring their deaths, before he searched them for valuables. Daemon, witnessing the scene unfold, felt a pang of unease at the sight of such cold-blooded violence from one so young. Yet, he knew better than to intervene in the ways of the Ironborn. This was their way, and Dalton was merely following in the footsteps of his forebears. As the cries of the fallen echoed across the blood-soaked sands of Bloodstone, Daemon steeled his heart, silently acknowledging the price of victory in their brutal campaign to conquer the Stepstones. With the Ironborn at their side, they would continue their conquest, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake as they forged their legacy upon the seas. Chapter 27, Cosimo Rogare II. Author's note: another chapter, the next day. This must be a record. Anyway, this is a very short one, for some reason, but I solemnly believe that size doesn't matter. So I hope you enjoy. Check out my Patreon for 5 advanced chapters, and I hope you have a wonderful time. Patreon, patreon.com/Nivelheima. Underscore 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 un. As the morning sun cast its golden rays over the sprawling landscape of the disputed lands, an old man sat atop a weathered hilltop, his gaze fixed upon the bustling activity below. Cosimo, the head of the Rogare Bank and a survivor of the tumultuous conflicts that had ravaged these lands for generations. Now, in the twilight of his life, he bore witness to a new chapter in the region's history, the birth of a city that would stand as a beacon of hope amidst the chaos of war. Below him, workers toiled tirelessly, their hands wielding hammers and shovels as they laid the foundations of what would soon become known as Des. Named for its strategic position at the heart of the Triarchy, the 3 rival factions vying for dominance in the region, the city was intended to serve as a neutral ground, a sanctuary where merchants, travelers, and refugees alike could find respite from the ceaseless bloodshed that plagued the land. Cosimo watched with a mixture of pride and apprehension as the city began to take shape before his eyes. The walls raised ever higher, a testament to the determination of those who dared to defy the chaos that had long held sway over the disputed lands. "It truly is something to behold," interjected a voice from his right. Cosimo turned to the man. Sat next to him was a short yet muscular figure. He wore luxurious silks of flamboyant dyes, yet his hair was bald and his beard a boring black, quite uncharacteristic for a Tyrogi rich man. "It is Archon Modares, or should I say Magister, now." The warlord didn't quite match his reputation. He neither seemed charming nor intimidating. He was quite muscular, yet his short stature made for a significant hurdle in his martial prowess. He wore a permanent scowl on his face, always angry and belligerent, yet somehow he managed to wrangle the whole city of Tyrosh into his hands, organize an alliance between the cities of Myr, Lys, and his own that preceded the Triarchy, and in a single fell swoop, destroyed Luhar's backing, forcing him to join forces with the weakened Myr. Erikwo's slight smile quickly soured at the mention of his new title. "That fool Jaco couldn't help himself. Now I have to be surrounded by foolish sycophants and greedy merchants vying for my favor," he complained. "I wished for it to come much later." Indeed, the former Magister Jaco's betrayal stung deep. His shift to Luhar's side was the final nail in the Archon's metaphorical coffin, forcing the latter to use many trump cards much too early. Dark secrets were uncovered, resources sabotaged, and allies subverted, yet it came too soon, allowing Luhar to escape with his hide intact and forcing the former Archon to take up the Magister's place in order to secure his position. Cosimo let out a sardonic laugh. "Sometimes caution can be naught but cowardice. You cannot always expect everything to wrap up in a neat little bow. Sometimes, you have to dirty your hands in order to get what you wish." The scowl on the short man's face deepened, yet he hummed thoughtfully. I know, which doesn't stop me from complaining. He turned his gaze to the working masses, the severity of his expression lightening up ever so slightly. At least this endeavor proved to be fruitful. Cosimo nodded. The alliance between Modares and the Rogare Bank proved to be a frightening thing indeed. After the return of the envoys from Westeros with good news, of course the political situation in the Triarchy shifted significantly. The assurance of the abolishment of tolls and tariffs within the island chain proved to be a balm to many a merchant's aching purse. A peaceful, open stepstones backed by the strength of dragons would certainly allow for easier trade, and many slave traders, Tyrosh being one of them, may have professed their complaints, yet the presence of the rogue prince burning all slaver ships that attempt to cross the narrow sea proved to be a significant deterrent to their woes. In their first action as allies, Iroquois and Cosimo decided to centralize the Triarchy and increase its influence on Essos by building its first project, a capital right in the center of the disputed lands, a testament to their unity and a significant investment into the surrounding lands. In truth, it may be the only way to increase their combined influence over the larger alliance. With the recent events, Lys was firmly in Cosimo's hands, and Tyrosh was always in Modares. Yet, if things continued as they were, then the Triarchy would bloat without their supervision, giving birth to competitors outside of their influence. So, taking advantage of their momentary dominance, they decided to build Des, using Rogare gold and Tyroshi men, and with the chaotic situation at Myr, the two would be free to decide on all the matters of the new capital, and furthermore, the Triarchy. How goes Luhar, still frothing at the mouth? Cosimo asked. The former Archon's influence in the militant side of the Free Cities proved to be underestimated. He proved to have many eyes and ears both within the common sailors and the naval officers, let alone the common merchants that took his gold. His insight into Luhar's operations should be much deeper than his own. He was all about gold and marriages, after all. Iroquois frowned. The bastard has made a comeback. He managed to ally with a mysterious figure, only called by some stupid title. He huffed. The abominable man, they title him, a deformed figure incapable to walk, with bark growing over his skin and flesh covering his eyes. Rumors are abound that he has 1,001 eyes, with none escaping his gaze. Cosimo lightly strokes his grey beard in thought. So he managed to wrangle a competent spy master to his side. He said, "Now that you speak of it, I heard news from the Red Temple. Their criers are shouting in the streets of Myr about a man employing dark sorceries to seek into men's secrets, made a pretty penny from it too." Cosimo turns to the shorter man. This so-called alliance, or whatever it is a recent development. Is it possible to bring this deformed man to our side? New players all strive to play larger games, after all. Modares idly mentions with his hand. I shall make some overtures, however. I am more concerned about this prince, the governor of the Stepstones. Rakalio spoke well of the boy, yet who knows about these Targaryens? Every new one proves to be crazier than the last. The Rogare head leans further into his cane. He's at Dragonstone for the moment, probably in order to familiarize himself with his new role. Prudent, yet unfortunate for us, we cannot get significant information from that island. The Magister's temper seemed to blaze aflame yet again. Tell me about. He groans. It is not the fact that we cannot employ spies there, it is that they prove to be ineffectual. One says he's drinking and whoring his way into the city, others say he spends his time buried amongst books, the same about the older one too. Cosimo nods. The small folk love him, and his men are staunchly loyal. Not only that, but they receive more than enough compensation for their work. The best defense against spies is to keep your subordinates happy and satisfied, and the Crown Prince seems to have taken that lesson well. He shrugs. Yes, I digress. I believe we already know enough about the boy. My son says he's good at negotiation, yet greedy for spoils, much like any other merchant. Whether that is good or not is left to be said, however. Chapter 28, Aegon IV. Author's note: Another day, another chapter. The recent episode of the TV show was decent. It is heartening to see Jace finally showing his worth, and Alicent's face of horror as she realizes that a council of a king that refuses to acknowledge Rhaenyra because she's a woman would refuse her regency was gold. What was she even thinking? Daemon porking his mother was strange, but his whole subplot right now doesn't make sense anyway, so I give it no mind. All in all, decent one. I have also been working on a Robb Stark Jedi Lord SI, couldn't get the idea out of my head, so I thought, why not? So look out for that too. Check out my Patreon for 5 advanced chapters, and I hope you have a wonderful time. Patreon, patreon.com/Nivelhema. Underscore 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 un. It has been 6 months since Aegon came to Dragonstone, and to be honest, he was the happiest he ever was. Creating distance between him and his overbearing family was good for him, and even though he spent his days working, shadowing men in their organization of the island in order to learn the ropes of the trade, he found himself fulfilled in purpose, tired, but joyous. Sunfire echoed his sentiments, as he let out an exuberant roar, lighting up the early morning sky with his beautiful flames. Aegon laughed, and Sunfire moved in sync with his thoughts, as it suddenly flew down unprompted. An odd thing, he noticed, is that his gloominess had negatively affected his dragon in the past. Out of his family, Aegon's bond with his dragon was the strongest. Baelon may be the exception. Again, he claimed it at the young age of 8, not the youngest. That honor goes to Durin, yet his was special in that Sunfire chose him, not the opposite. The young dragon just showed up one day on a visit to the dragon pit. He approached Aegon first, and young as he was, the prince played joyfully with the shining lizard until his mother ruined things. Ever since, Aegon would visit Sunfire every change he got. The dragon keepers back at King's Landing often got annoyed at their relationship. Sunfire would throw a tantrum every time he left him alone, earning for his companionship. Then Aegon fell to his own vices in an attempt to escape from his family issues. Deep into depression, he was unable to notice that his negative emotions affected his bond significantly. The dragon keepers spoke in fear of Sunfire lethargy. He was unwilling to move much, and he spent his time deep into the dragon pit lazily waiting for his less frequent visits. The most bright and cheerful dragon had turned despondent. Aegon thought. As Aegon's thoughts danced between the past and the present, a distant figure on the horizon snapped him back to reality. Aegon squinted against the morning sunlight, recognizing the unmistakable silhouette of a dragon, a purple dragon, larger than Sunfire, with wings that seemed to stretch endlessly across the sky. Baelon, Aegon whispered, his heart quickening with anticipation. Sunfire, sensing his rider's excitement, let out a low rumble, his eyes fixated on the approaching dragon. Sunfire's wings beat rhythmically as they ascended toward the summit of Dragonmont, the wind rushing past them in a whirlwind of excitement. Aegon watched in a daze as Baelon and his Zyrex descended, the ground trembling beneath their weight. The purple dragon's eyes gleamed with intelligence as it landed gracefully next to Sunfire, its presence commanding respect and admiration. Baelon! Aegon called out, unable to contain his joy. Baelon grinned, dismounting from his dragon with practiced ease. Aegon, it's good to see you, he said, his voice filled with warmth. As Aegon cautiously yet happily approached his brother, before he could do anything, Baelon approaches suddenly, wrapping his arms around his shoulders. Aegon pauses for a split second, before clumsily returning the hug. Sunfire and Zyrex regarded each other with a mixture of curiosity and respect, their connection palpable even to Aegon's keen senses. They exchanged low rumbles and gentle nudges, communicating in a language that transcended words. It seems Sunfire has missed Zyrex, Aegon remarked, a smile playing at the corners of his lips. Baelon chuckled, running a hand along his dragon's scales. And Zyrex missed him too. It's good to be reunited. He swept his gaze over Aegon. You look remarkably better, Aeg, I can barely notice the dark circles under your eyes. Aegon let the words wash over him. The distance has been good for me. He says. These past few moons were peaceful. He spoke with a serenity that was uncharacteristic of him. Did you come to visit? I thought Dragonstone no longer needed you to overlook its day-to-day operations. I came to see you, silly. Baelon responds. You're leaving for your new holdings this week. I thought mayhaps you needed a proper goodbye. His smirk widens. I also wanted to see the new ship, Sun's Glare, was it? Aegon's heart swelled with pride at the mention of his new flagship. The galleon was christened for the first time the last month, prominently floating in the private docks. It proved to be completely functional, its crew familiarizing with the ship as it went on occasional trips to Driftmark and Claw Isle. Yes, I never got to thank you about that. Baelon offhandedly shakes his hand. Don't mention it, the ship was meant to be a symbol of your authority as Lord Governor. He says. Others are to be built next, for Father and I first, then others. He extended his arm over Aegon's shoulder. Now, tell me about your time here. He says. Sir Alfred and Violar spoke well of your character. Well. Underscore 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 un. They spent an embarrassingly long time standing on a random mountainside speaking before they decided to head back to Dragonstone. The race back was pretty exciting. Aegon won, of course. His dragon was smaller and lither, allowing for more acceleration. As they landed, they were greeted with Alfred Broom and a gaggle of dragon keepers. Your Graces. The knight spoke. It is lucky that some of our men spotted your dragons. We were quite worried when Prince Aegon was late. Baelon waved him off. It was a reunion between brothers, no need to fret much. He says. I'm exhausted, I'll head to my quarters for now. Tomorrow, I shall get a report from you and Violar. He turns to Aegon. Get some rest, tomorrow, early in the morn, I want you to be present. Aegon nods. Underscore 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 un. Aegon awkwardly sat next to Sir Alfred and Maester Violar in the Lord's Solar, waiting for his brother's arrival. Sir Broom sat still, staring at the door with an impassive gaze, while Violar was rifling through a book, scratching some words in from time to time. He made a conscious effort not to fidget, visibly uncomfortable with the silence. Aegon was about to open his mouth when the door abruptly opened, letting Baelon enter the room. Sorry for my lateness. He says. I may have missed the comforts of this island too much that I overslept. He claps his hand. Now. Let's get started, shall we? Violar nods, being the first to speak. Certainly, following your instructions, I left the day-to-day matters of the island in the hands of Lord Quince's subordinates' hands. They were certainly capable. Violar stares back at the large book, momentarily reading certain passages. The expansions are going as predicted. We saw a predicted increase in our mining profits, while the recent changes in King's Landing seems to have shifted quite a bit of interest from foreign merchants. He looks back to Baelon. Seeing the winds shift, many a merchant would rather dock in Dragonstone than King's Landing. Alongside the dye, spirits, sea silk, and the recent discoveries from the workshop, I'd say the profits increased by half. Excellent. Speaking of the workshop, how did the alchemists fare? He asks. Aside from certain bouts of hostility, they seemed very much excited at their new prospects. He says. Although results on taming the wildfire proved to be lackluster, their expertise in alchemical solutions did help. However, in our dye and spirit production, I think they may even develop new interesting perfumes. Then all is well. Sir Alfred, how goes the training? Dealing with experienced soldiers certainly helped, Your Grace. Broom's voice was deep and rough, as can be expected from such a dour man. Their experience in Dorne may have taught them some bad habits, but nothing some training won't handle. By next moon I should have the next batch of officers ready. Baelon smiles. You're a godsend, Alfred. I hear your son is close to reaching his mid-20s. He asks. Alfred just nods. I didn't hear much bad things about him, so you should start training him as a successor. I believe your talents may be more amenable to work in the region instead of being wasted in such a position as Castellan. He says. A military base is currently getting built on the other side of the Blackwater, facing King's Landing. I wish for it to be a center of operations for the Legion in the Crownlands. It is time for our purple cloaks to become a true standing army, and I want you to lead it. Any who didn't spend time with Sir Alfred would think he was not affected by the news, yet Aegon could spot the tightening of his fists and the moistening of his eyes. The man was clearly touched beyond words. The dour knight bows to his liege. I shall not disappoint you, Your Grace. He says. Baelon mentions for his to sit back. I know you won't. He responds. It was your training that created the foundation of the purple cloaks. The officers and soldiers you trained were the bedrock by which this army was built. It is without a shred of a doubt your accomplishments that assured the conquest by which I gained my fame. He says. I should be the one to thank you. Alfred listlessly nods back. Aegon thinks he may have lost his voice. After that touching scene, they spent some time speaking about further details. Baelon heard about the current situation and the issues plaguing the island, not that they were many, and swiftly directed resources to improve the state, adjusting previous plans to accommodate unforeseen changes. Aegon learned much. Baelon clearly had intimate knowledge about the island, from its geography to its people. It was something that could only be done through thorough investigation and a very dedicated workforce. Aegon knew better than most how much his brother spent in gathering information that others deemed useless. It was after a lengthy conversation that Baelon was left alone with Aegon. The former poured a cup of iced juice in the latter's cup. I'm proud of what you have achieved. Baelon starts. I heard you were diligent in your learning. My men say you were attentive and determined, yet not arrogant. You befriended the training sailors, got familiar with ships, and Alfred says your sword arm isn't half bad. He says. Out of the people that you know, who are you putting in charge of your fleet? He asks. Aegon grabs the poured cup, taking a meager sip from its contents. I have my eye on Tristan Emagur. He was one of the men you rescued from slavery, who made the change to sailing during your time here. He's the youngest of the eligible candidates, smart and cautious, and he has no qualms about suborning himself to what he may think is a child. He says. His prior experience will also serve useful in dealing with SSE elements. Baelon nods. A good choice, the same one I would have done in your place. He says. To be honest, Aegon. I came here to meet you, to be present when you depart, yes, but also to inform you of the intricacies and the Crown's decisions regarding your position. I'm all ears, brother. Good. He says. Shortly after you reach Bloodstone you will be met by a Bravasi envoy, one Lohonest Oris. He's a key holder of the Iron Bank, so make sure to be respectful yet not subservient. At Aegon's nod, he continues. The Iron Throne's position is that we believe cooperation with Bravus is key in the coming days. You are to negotiate official terms between our house and the Free City in regards to trade. What terms should I focus on? Aegon asks. Baelon takes a sip of his own drink. Be aggressive, in a non-confrontational way. Much like the Triarchy, Bravasi ships will face neither tariffs nor tolls for their passage in the Stepstones. In fact, I want you to fake getting convinced by the man in offering favorable terms for their ships for all services available or to be available in the island chain. He instructs. Then I want you to make overtures. The presence of Daemon's, Corlys, and yours fleets means that the royal fleet at King's Landing finds itself unoccupied, we wish to conduct a joint trading expedition between the Iron Throne and Bravus mimicking the Sea Snake's voyages. We can't have so many ships floating on our docks with nothing to do. Right. Aegon comments. Bravus has its own trading expedition, organized by private fleets owned by affluent merchants. Convincing them to bet their mighty arsenal in such a risky endeavor may be more than I can chew. Baelon nods in understanding. If you were speaking of decades before, then you might be right. Yet the presence of the Triarchy is like an invisible noose on the Bravasese necks. They backed my conquest since they expected the SSE alliance to shatter from their losses, yet no one expected Cosimo and Mota Reis to join hands and centralize power. He shrugs. A clever move by the duo. Their eastern investments will probably turn out fruitful, and once they do, they will become the dominant power in Essos, turning their gaze north to Pentos and Bravus. Baelon interrupts. At this moment in time, Bravus has no choice but to find allies in order to preserve their power. Pentos may be under its thumb, yet they are much too fearful of the Triarchy to be of use. In fact, some ambitious Pentosi magister may choose to side with the Triarchy in order to secure their complete independence. Those misers sure do chafe with slavery illegal. An alliance with Lorith or Norvos may work, yet the latters are much too distant and unaffected by the Triarchy to care. Which leaves us. Aegon comments. Exactly, Bravos not only has to ally with us, they salivate at the thought of it. With our new ownership of the Stepstones, the conquest of Dorne, the new resources from the north, and our increased production, Bravus is bound to control the Narrow Sea, provided they have our help, of course. Baelon says. Not only that, but they can strike the iron while it's hot, creating a buffer between them and the rising menace. Things finally click in Aegon's head, his face slowly morphing in chalk. Baelon laughs at his expression. That was the same expression father made. He japes. Yes, as you have surmised. A dangerous glint colors Baelon's eye, his smile turning predatory. Bravus is going to invade Pentos, officially swallowing it whole. He says. And we are going to help them. Chapter 29, Viserys 3. Check out my Patreon for 5 advanced chapters, and I hope you have a wonderful time. Patreon, patreon.com/Nivelheima. Underscore 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 un. Kingship is such a burden. Viserys thinks. Soldiers at my door, your grace. The man bellows. The prince is recruiting able-bodied men from my lands and putting them in my lands. I can no longer oversee my hold with ease of mind. The middle-aged man complaints get much support from his surroundings, acknowledging his grievances. Those men, Lord Edgerton, he rasps, are what is keeping your lands free of outlaws and bandits. They enforce the king's peace, and as long as there is no reason for it, you will find no trouble from them. Forgive me, your grace, but methinks we can keep the peace just fine, like we did for thousands of years. Another lord pipes up. Having men, owing no allegiance to us and pledging no oaths to our cause, camping at our doors is unacceptable, and goes against millennia of traditions. He says. I urge you, your grace. Have the prince stop his actions, as we can no longer stand for them. The king sighs. My son only does what he does for your sakes, my lords. He matches the gaze of each of his courtiers. Those men are paid by our gold, fed with our grains, and trained by our men, yet they do your job of maintaining the peace, patrolling the roads and culling bandits, but that is not the reason for their establishment. At their silent question, he continues. The recent changes have been a gift from the gods. New farming methods and the influx of iron from the north allows farmers to have more and more bountiful harvests, assuring our ability to feed our people without question. He explains. Yet as more and more grains flow into the market, the price of them plummets, as most of you can attest to. Some of the smarter men's eyes light up in recognition, they seem to have caught the implications. I have already received rumors of families that have more grain than what they can use, families that, while capable of feeding themselves, aren't capable of supporting more than 1 or 2 children. And so while first sons may support themselves with farming, and third ones could find another trade to practice, we find ourselves in a conundrum where there isn't enough demand for grain nor artisans to teach their skills to every man. What do you think those left behind would do? What is a common man's decision when it comes to feeding himself and his family if they have no fields to till nor trade to ply? Every man that joins my son's legions is one put to better use, keeping you lands safe, building roads, and digging canals instead of robbing, pillaging, and raping your people. He says. Let me be clear, my lords. Those men that you say are camping at your doors are doing so at my expense, and at your service. While they are doing so, your people are free to train, to farm, to work for your sake, and when the bells of war are tolling, it is those men standing at your doors that will safeguard you, at no expense from your houses, no need for calling untrained levies nor endangering your nights. The lords stay silent, thoroughly flummoxed at his words, but some are still voicing their complaints. What is to stop the legions, as you call them, to simply stage a rebellion against us? Lord Edgerton. I have 200 well-equipped and trained infantry at my doors. What is to stop them from barging in my castle and putting me and my house to the sword? Viserys leans toward the man, making sure his face is as menacing as can be. The same thing that guarantees the loyalty of 7 kingdoms. He says. Fire and blood. The king lethargically stands, leaning heavily on his cane. I tire of this, court is adjourned for the day. The boots of the king's guard echo as he leaves the throne room. Underscore 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 un. King Viserys made his way slowly to the small council chamber, his mind still echoing with the grumbling voices of his lords. The throne room debates had drained him, and now the tedious minutiae of governance awaited him. He entered the chamber and took his seat, barely acknowledging the courtiers already deep in discussion. As the others droned on about grain supplies, tax levies, and border disputes, Viserys found his thoughts wandering. His eyes glazed over, staring at the ornate carvings on the wooden table without really seeing them. His mind drifted back to the faces of his lords, their complaints and fears still fresh in his memory. His body was present, but his spirit felt detached, floating somewhere far away from the burdens of kingship. The voice of Otto Hightower, his hand, cut through the haze. Your Grace, your thoughts on the matter? Viserys blinked, struggling to recall the topic at hand. My thoughts, Lord Otto, he asked, attempting to mask his distraction. Otto's expression was one of polite concern, but there was a hint of impatience in his eyes. Yes, Your Grace. We were discussing the recent taxation adjustments and their impact on the smaller lordships. Ah, yes, Viserys said, clearing his throat. The adjustments. I apologize, my mind was elsewhere. Please, continue. Otto nodded, his face softening slightly. Of course, Your Grace. I also wished to inquire about the prince's absence. There have been whispers regarding his recent changes to the city and their implications. Might we expect him to return soon? Viserys sighed inwardly. He knew Otto's inquiry was not purely out of concern but also a subtle criticism of Baelon's initiatives. My son is at Dragonstone, Viserys replied, his voice steady. He is handling matters related to the Stepstones. I trust his judgment in these affairs. Otto's lips thinned, but he nodded in acquiescence. Very well, Your Grace. We shall continue to monitor the situation. As the council resumed its discussions, Viserys found his attention slipping again. His mind wandered to Baelon, his son, and the myriad of issues surrounding him. He admired his son's zeal and ambition, but it often led to complications that landed squarely on Viserys' shoulders. He sighed deeply, feeling the weight of the crown pressing down on him. The increase in his workload was relentless, every decision, every complaint, a new burden to bear. He felt a pang of weariness, both physical and emotional. "Baelon, you troublesome wretch," he thought with a hint of affectionate exasperation. "You couldn't make it easy, could you? Always something to stir the pot, always another fire to put out." The king's lips curved into a faint smile, despite himself. Baelon's actions, though often vexing, were driven by a fierce loyalty and a desire to protect the realm in his own unconventional ways. And for that, Viserys was grateful, even if it meant more sleepless nights and headaches. As the council session dragged on, Viserys forced himself to refocus, pushing through the fog of fatigue and frustration. Kingship was a burden, indeed, but it was one he bore for the sake of his people, his family, and the realm. And he would continue to bear it, come what may. And yet his role extended beyond kingship. He was to do as a father should, laying the foundation for his son's vision, for what is his worth as a father otherwise? "I wonder what he'll be, as king," he mused. "What I wouldn't pay to be witness to such a sight." Chapter 30, Aegon v. Read me. Next chapter is an announcement that discusses my absence, new stories, and changes to this one. Check out my Patreon for 5 advanced chapters, and I hope you have a wonderful time. Patreon, patreon.com/Nivelheima. ________________________ Aegon Targaryen sat at the head of the table in his solar, surrounded by his advisors. The room was filled with the murmur of their voices and the rustling of parchments. He listened intently as they discussed the current state of the island, taking in their wisdom and experience. "We need to fortify the eastern shore," one advisor said, pointing to a map spread across the table. "The raids have been relentless. That is not going to be an issue for long. Prince Daemon has already dealt with most of them. What we need is to upgrade the ports. As long as our ships cannot dock comfortably in the islands, we won't be able to arrange a significant naval presence to scare the rest," added another. "The sooner the fleet is able to be stationed in the stepstones in full force, the better." Aegon nodded, trying to absorb their advice. He felt a pang of insecurity. At 15, he was still learning and unsure of himself. He wanted to contribute but found himself too inexperienced. "How long until the port on Bloodstone get done?" The man turned to Aegon, one of the acolytes of the workshop. He noticed. "Using the method used in building the new ports in Dragonstone, we were able to use liquid rock to create a solid foundation for the docks. However, what the previous residents of the island built could barely be called a dock. In fact, the island lacks the favorable positions to build a good harbor, so we have to build our own fortification against the natural elements." He glances at his parchment. "It is quite fortunate that this island is rich in limestone, so we could produce our own liquid rock. The construction should be finished soon." "Good." He nods, eager to see his ship. The sun's glare proved to be too much of a beast to stay in the island, so it's still floating on the shores of Dragonstone. "Is there any way to speed this process?" The advisors associated with the tasks looked at each other in concern, trading meaningful glances. After a while, they seemingly came to an unspoken agreement where the previous one began to hesitantly speak. "You Grace, since you asked, we could considerably speed up the construction if we were to." He glanced to his peers for validation, before turning back again with a gulp. "If we were to acquire the help of your dragon, your Grace." Aegon glanced around in confusion, not because he didn't know what was implied, but because he knew not about the reason for their distress. "And how are we to do so?" Something about his reply seemed to assuage their worries, as the man swiftly took out a map of the island and showcased it on the table. He pointed at a particular spot. "This is where the original dock was built. The pirates occupying this island may be uneducated, but they knew the basics. They built it with a small rocky chain of cliffs at the back, shielding it from the wind. He explains. But the waves on the shore are particularly strong, so we need to shield them from that side. Another man piped up from the side. The original plan is to build a series of barriers in the water to weaken the flow of the water, but due to the strength of the waves both the danger and the cost of materials and effort would be significant. He says. But, if we were to get the help of your dragon, your grace. He hesitated. We'd be able to simply dig into the cliff, creating a protected area for the port. Aegon nodded. Let us go with that approach. Send someone to inform me when sunfire is going to be needed. A chance to burn rocks with sunfire? That just sounds like a fun time. As for the residents, are any willing to stay? Aside from the previous pirates and small folk previously living in this island, his brother's plan was to hire as many workers from outside as possible to work on the occupation, before hopefully convincing them to settle in the stepstones. This land is unsuitable for farming, so the majority depend on other trades to pay for their livelihoods. Another advisor spoke. I'm afraid, Your Grace, that with the current conditions of the islands, few are willing to permanently stay here. Bloodstone shows promise, however. People feel safer with you here, Your Grace. By him they mean his dragon. However, when our preparations are done, we should see a very great deal of trade channeled through the stepstones. Those present at its onset will see the greatest benefits, which should motivate them to stay more, Your Grace. He finished. Aegon nods once again. It was expected, to be honest. They may have built a small castle out of what remained of the previous pirate lord's residence, but it significantly paled in front of what he was used to. The small folk must feel miserable in the small hovel called a town. Are there any solutions you could think of concerning this matter, aside from the obvious, of course? He asks. The man tilts his head in thought, a finger on his bottom lip. I guess we could offer other types of benefits, maybe land. He asks himself. Aside from the limestone deposits, we have found nothing of import aside from tin and some corals and fish on the sea. The soil is hard and doesn't let anything grow easily, so offering some of the more skilled commoners small plots of land could be very enticing, especially since we have no need for it. Aegon thought on the matter. Land is a touchy subject for nobles, but he couldn't blame the advisor for coming up with the idea. Only for the first few settlers, and only useless plots of lands. He says. For the other early settlers we will offer to sell some of it in exchange of gold, but no merchants, wouldn't want them to gobble up what is meant for the small folk. The man nods in agreement. Wise, Your Grace. At the mention of fish and corals, Aegon had an idea. The caravels, they are relatively small and easy to repair, right? At their nods, he continues. Can we have our workers fashion some trawling nets for our idle ones? That should ease some of our food expenses. Another man answers. Possibly, Your Grace. He glances at his parchment, making some mental calculus. It wouldn't be feasible for long periods, but it could tide us up while construction is underway. Then do so. Leaning back on his chair, Aegon presses on the bridge of his nose as if to make his headache to dissipate. You're all dismissed, we're done for the day. Inform me should anything unusual happen. Yes, Your Grace. These men were skilled, knowledgeable people, yet it took a long time for Aegon to get them to be honest. In the beginning, they often attempted to deceive him in fear of retaliation. It was fortunate that he was able to build a rapport with some of them during his time in Dragonstone. He huffed. Even with my efforts to seem reliable, they were deathly afraid to mention using his dragon to help in the construction. He thought. The Valyrians were famous for using their dragons as something as minor as beasts of burden. Why would I be against having Sunfire melt some boulders? As the door closed behind the last advisor, he leaned back in his chair and mused on his situation. Despite the busy days, the horrible weather, and the mosquitoes that seemed to plague him constantly, he was happier here than he had ever been under his mother's watchful eyes. His new post had been fulfilling. He spent hours in his solar, his afternoons were quite calm, so he usually spent them at peace. Reading books, sipping on chilled juice, or simply taking a nap. A knock on the door interrupted his relaxation. "Enter," Aegon called. Sir Gaimon Broom stepped in, a son of Alfred Broom, his expression serious. "Your Grace, Prince Daemon and the Ironborn have returned from their campaign against the slavers' ships." Aegon felt a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. "I will go to receive them," he said, standing and straightening his tunic. He made his way to the courtyard where Daemon and the Ironborn were dismounting. Prince Daemon's expression was cold and distant, which is to be expected. Daemon's disapproval of Aegon's Hightower heritage was no secret. The Ironborn, led by Arrygin Greyjoy, Dalton Greyjoy's uncle and regent, wore their arrogance like armor. "Uncle," Aegon greeted, inclining his head. "Welcome back." Daemon's eyes flicked over him, unreadable. "Nephew," there was a note of denigration in his tone. But Aegon effortlessly ignored it. Half a lifetime of dealing with his mother, father, and grandfather's backhanded compliments and stares of disappointment allowed him to do so. If he wanted to rattle Aegon, his uncle should try much harder. Arrygin Greyjoy stepped forward, his demeanor haughty. "We bring victory and spoils, young prince. Perhaps one day you will see the battlefield yourself." Aegon's eyes narrowed at the veiled insult. "You must be the Greyjoy I've heard about." He nonchalantly replied and shifted his gaze to the young child next to him, whose garments seemed to be splattered with dried bloodstains. "And who is this?" The child glared impetuously at the prince. Arrygin let out a cheerful laugh. "That's the heir to the Iron Islands, that is," he says. "Barely 10 yet already blooded, he'd be terrorizing the Greenlanders soon enough." Aegon raises an eyebrow. He was told that the Ironborn were rash and boastful, but to brag about raiding Westerosi men in front of a Targaryen prince is particularly foolish. He subtly glances at Daemon, noticing his apathy, he resolves himself to dealing with the comment. "Hopefully not our Greenlanders." He tries to put as much sarcasm into his reply as possible. "Sunfire dislikes salty meat." The comment goes over the child's head, obviously, but the older Greyjoy's eyes light up in slight surprise and excitement. "You Targaryens are surely made of tough stuff." He laughs the comment off. Aegon turns back to the servants. "The new keep is still under construction, but we should have enough space to accommodate you inside it," he says. Arrygin shows a perfect set of white teeth. "No need." He puts a hand over Dalton's head, which the boy swats away. "Greyjoys only sleep at castles they pillage or own, it'd be an affront to the drowned god otherwise." Although the bread and salt were much appreciated. The man's infuriatingly handsome face turned to Daemon. "Farewell, rogue prince." He extends a hand. "You were truly a terror on the battlefield." Daemon stares at him for a second, seemingly hesitating to respond, before he grabbed his wrist in salutations. They share a manly nod, before the Greyjoys saunter out of the keep, the tall frame of the older man looking comical next to the young boy. "Well, that was that." He turned to Daemon. "Uncle, if you would join me in my solar, we have much to discuss." Daemon nodded. "Very well, Aegon." As the group dispersed to their quarters, Aegon led Daemon to his solar. The room, once filled with the noise of advisors, now felt charged with the unspoken tension between them. Chapter 31, Announcement. "It's been a while, I guess." I know, I promised to drown you in chapters once I got done with personal stuff. At the time my promise was totally serious, yet shit just kept on piling up, from applying to different master's programs, traveling around the country to do tests, preparing for them, part-time jobs, and moving. A lot of my time was taken. But that wasn't the primary reason why I didn't update for so long. The issue was simple: writer's block. First, let me preface this by saying that the second season of HOTD sucked, and that it didn't help in diminishing my motivation. But seriously, after months of not writing anything in my Baelon the Mighty fiction, I had to reread the prior chapters to get back on track. Thing is, those chapters sucked. So I'd sit in front of my laptop for literal hours, trying to start a new chapter when the only thing I could think about at the time was how bad the previous ones were and how they could be improved. I would even lie down for a long time before sleep thinking about it. But at the end of the day, my head would not come up with anything, but would in fact push me to write other stuff, like the King of Winter story that I just started releasing. So finally, I came to a conclusion. Baelon the Mighty is getting a read it. I'm not gonna restart from scratch or anything, nor will I stop writing new chapters, but the story is going to experience a certain rework from the prologue to chapter 34. As recompense, I thought that I'd start releasing other stories, some that I've already written a lot about, and my is also Patreon getting repurposed into one where as long as you get the first tier, you get all released chapters available. Check out my profile for other stories, and watch out for more. As for my patrons, I really thank you. You can't believe how much help to me your support gives me, even if it seems like nothing to you. Ciao. P.S. That King of Winter story is the Jedi Lord, S.I. Robb Stark FIC I talked about. If you're interested, you can check out my profile. New chapter is coming soon. Write a review.